Hey everyone, Anark here, and this is another Anark live stream, second one of the month, I believe. So appreciate anybody who's already here. Going to be sending out the link to this here live stream. You know how that goes. I am very sweaty, as the title of the stream suggests. It is really, really hot here, super hot. And I have lights on, and also last night there was a power outage that took out the entire city block and internet, so I don't know what the hell happened there. That was pretty crazy. But the apartment is still cooling back down after all that. So I am just trying to survive. Hey Iprieto, hey Black Anarchist, hey Long Defiant. Yeah, I don't know what happened with that. That must have been a pretty big, that must have been a crisis. I bet it was like some kind of construction accident or something like that. Oof. All right, spreading the link around. Haven't been quite able to get this camera just adjusted right today. I've been fiddling with it the whole time before the stream. I've brought my drink of choice today. That is vodka and White Monster. I'm a classy, classy man. What is the painting in the background? That is from the Zapatistas. That is a painting that goes towards donating to the Zapatistas. It's pretty cool. It's a pretty cool painting. So that's what you see in the background all the time on my streams. It is not famous. It's a cool painting though. There's a bunch of those on their website. If y'all want to go to schoolforchiapas.com and go to donate, there's all kinds of cool products on there. Yeah, getting the weekend started off with a good drink. All right. Oh, getting in early for once. Interesting. Numerous people have told me they're getting in early. Glad y'all are here. Yeah, I am so sweaty right now. God damn. Covered in a sheen of sweat. Okay. So yeah, as for channel updates, I have basically finished the video responding to Socialism for All and Bad Empanada. The video actually probably would have just released today, except that the power outage happened yesterday evening, and the power outage, well, lasted until early in the morning. So I just left the apartment and didn't quite get back to it. Or didn't get back to it. I didn't get back to the apartment until today. And, you know, it wasn't really time to do the last finishing touches on it before I published it to the channel. So expect that probably next Friday. But that video, it, by the way, is 2 hours and 10 minutes long. And I really took the high road. I really just decided I was going to educate people about theory. I wasn't going to be snarky and insulting. I was going to educate people about the theory behind why I was making the claims in the original stream clip. And for those who actually care about the answers to the questions, then I think it will be satisfying. And for those that don't care and they're there in bad faith, then nothing would be satisfying because they already made up their minds before they began watching. But I think to anybody who actually cares about the truth, they will see that I am correct in the video. I'm also trying to start working on the video essays that I have let sit there for way too long. The ones on fascism, the one that is on the simulacrum and how the internet captures radicalism. And yeah, I think those, I'm going to start working on those a little more actively. I've just really been slacking on those for so long at this point. Yes, NLH. The video will be dropping next week. NLH is actually making I don't know, more than a cameo in the video. He's like 25 minutes of the video. So yeah. Charles says, greetings. Your modern anarchism videos are some great work. Well, I really appreciate that. They took a lot of work. You love the color scheme? Sweet. I'm really glad to hear that. Took a lot of reorganizing to get the room into this sort of state where it actually looks good when filming. I'd previously just set it up in my room just however it worked. And once I got a friend of mine to start being a production assistant, she was like, no, we need to like reorient how this room is set up so that it's actually good for filming. And yeah, it worked out well. Long Defiant says, is anyone else thinking capitalism is completely roached? Looking crispy around here. I don't know if we're going to see the end of capitalism because of its own self-destruction, but we are going to definitely see its self-destruction. We're going to see a big, a global depression within our lifetimes, if I had to guess. Posywid says, is Oklahoma having to deal with the same level of data center nonsense as Texas? It's been pretty rough down here. Oh, yeah, absolutely. We've actually, I think, pushed them out in 2 different places, though. I think we pushed them out in Sand Springs, and another one of the tribes actually pushed out one of the data centers that was proposed. Have I heard about flock cameras? Oh, yeah. I mean, it's all anybody talks about these days, and probably rightfully so. It's an important thing to discuss. Flock cameras are just them setting up a surveillance state. And to be fair, I mean, you know, I think we're right to be upset about it, and we're right to be up in arms, but I should just note, for anybody living in the UK, that stuff is already the norm. They have cameras at like every intersection, as I've been told. So it's like we're just catching up with the surveillance state of other places like the UK, as I understand it. But I think in the UK that it's public. I mean, I could be wrong. I'm just guessing. I'm assuming that it's public, whereas here Flock is a private company, and all that is just being fed straight into a bunch of, you know, the private ecosystem of all these terrifying entities. If I had to guess, it's probably goes straight into like Palantir indirectly. Something says can confirm. I'm assuming that you live in the UK or that you know about the subject. Yeah, one thing I really need for this setup is I need a taller chair. It's funny how I look so small, or rather, I'm looking at myself on screen. I just look like a massive person in a tiny desk. It's not true. This is a huge desk. I'm a massive person, however. Today is extra sweaty day. Shorter desk? No. No, shorter desk? Oh, I'm not replacing the desk. That's way too much effort. I ain't got that kind of money. I'm literally just making ends meet. Spending money on things is very, very difficult, just so everybody knows. I am not doing financially well. I am doing just well enough to survive. Can't just sit on a phone book anymore. I mean, I guess I could sit on something, but... Charles says, I ought to set aside the time to watch all of the Modern Anarchism series again. I watched the first 2 videos a number of times each. Yeah, that'd be awesome. I actually think that parts 3 and 4 are just like very, very informative. I really recommend it. If you haven't watched 3 and 4, you should watch 3 and 4. They're I put so much effort into those, y'all. Like a year each. NLH says, being poor is so expensive. Everything costs more. It sucks. Yeah, it does. Yeah. No, it really does. I'm so grateful to have this channel. I'm so grateful to be able to survive off of it. But boy, am I barely surviving. I'm barely surviving. Rowan Bowers says, finally picked up Neuromancer, almost finished with it. Any opinions on that book in particular, or the resurgence of cyberpunk genre in general? I mean, I don't think I need to comment on why cyberpunk is resurging right now. It's pretty obvious that we're like entering the cyberpunk era. Neuromancer is a book that I started and I was like very impressed by its writing, but it was also almost impenetrable. It was like, I just had no idea what was being said. And I understand that that's normal. Like everybody really experiences that because he just throws you in the deep end and he doesn't really define anything. But, I was young at the time and I really just did not have the wherewithal to keep pushing forward to try to understand what the hell he was talking about. But, you know, it's the classic. It started the genre. That and Snow Crash. Alexander says, hey, hi, Anark. I'm midway through Zoe Baker's Means and Ends. If you've read it, what do you think of it and her work more widely? It's phenomenal. It's fantastic. It probably remains one of the best introductions to anarchism that you can get. I love that it contextualizes anarchism within history in a very robust way. It really deep dives into all the details. You know, Zoe Baker really makes clear her expertise on the subject. Her wider work is very important, and she should absolutely be read and studied. NLH says, out of all the people who responded to your video on MLs, who made the worst response? I mean, Bad Empanadas was pretty bad. But I think the Charlatix one was ridiculous. It was just like rambling and rambling and rambling. And he really did not bring up any unique points that I felt like really had to be addressed by him. I saw that President Sunday made one, but President Sunday's content is garbage, so I don't really expect that he has any good points to be made. I watched another video where he tried to critique me, and it was just pathetic. It was so bad. It was incredibly bad. At first, I was like, oh, a critique video. I'm going to watch it. And then I watched it. I was like, this is awful. This is so stupid. Like, he has no idea what he's talking about. Completely delusional. No understanding of theory. Yeah, I feel like President Sunday is just a rage baiter, to be honest. That's his whole brand as far as I can see. Like, I watched some other of his videos and I was like, this is just rage baiting. You're just a troll. You're a contrarian. You have no actual political perspectives. I'm blown away that there was a time, like when his channel was small, that people were trying to convince me to like go talk with him or something. It's like, why would I waste my time with this guy? Like, he just strikes me as like a sock dim or something. Like, I don't think he really has a revolutionary politics as far as I can see. Kid Ulysses says, Zoe published under AK. I used to volunteer there way back in the stacks. That's awesome. Yeah, AK is super cool. I'd definitely consider publishing with AK in the future. Legend Link says, I need to read means and ends. Yeah, absolutely. Read means and ends. It's phenomenal. Oh, yeah. As Kiko says, everybody should like the stream and go comment down below. Liking the stream pushes it into people's feeds. And also, I just want to say, like, when you see one of my videos in your feeds, please interact with the video. Like, my videos have been getting very little traction lately. It seems like every single one is doing worse than the last. So if you want to see the channel survive, please interact with the videos. What was I going to say, though? Oh, yeah. But also, if you're somebody that's watching afterwards and you hear some portion of this stream that seems like it would be a good stream clip, then please put the timestamp down in the comments. Mike working for Green says, you don't try to persuade debate opponents, you try to persuade the audience. Absolutely. That's exactly right. The debate opponent is never really going to concede, so you're not really trying to persuade them because it's not really possible. They're already dug in. Bad and Panada at least understood that, I think. You know, he was all about trying to persuade his audience. It was all about framing. He didn't really seem to care about the facts at all. It was like full of straw men and misinformation. And I think he knows that his audience doesn't know any better. And so he was just trying to misinform people and just trying to convince people to support counter-revolution. The Sunny D831 says, President Sunday was talking to a guy that said, you're anti-Semitic because you criticize the billionaire class. That's wild. That's wild. That's crazy. Anark, can you see when we spam the hundreds? Yeah, actually, they like pop up in my on my feed. I have not read the Zapatista Experience, no. I don't remember, when was it written? I'd be interested to know how up to date it is. Yeah, I see y'all spamming it. That's amazing. Platformism is based. Yeah. I'm an specificist, which is sort of an evolution of platformism. But yes, I would say platformism is absolutely superior to most other forms of anarchism. We strongly need an organizationalist form of anarchism to take hold. Oh, and NLH says that it released this year or last year. Okay, so it's like super up to date. That's cool. It was released in 2024. Okay. That's still pretty recent. Crux says, sorry for the heavy question. I find it hard to find direct information about what factually happened on October 7th. How can someone cut through the fog wall and get reliable info on this? Thanks. I think when it comes to something like that, where you've got like major states that are doing disinformation campaigns about it, it's really important to just read various sources and kind of compare what their actual citation is. I think what you'll find is that most of Israel's narratives about what took place on October 7th contain enormous amounts of like lies and misinformation, and that's extremely purposeful. Now, that's not to say that perhaps there weren't regrettable things that were done on October 7th. I suspect that there were. Pretty much any like large scale military action is going to be accompanied by atrocities. But I think if you look at the full context of what led up to October 7th, that you'll see that this was an extremely rational action, military action, defensive action by the Palestinians who were essentially being genocided. You know, I would ask anybody who's going to be overly judgmental about what took place on October 7th to ask themselves, you know, what would they consider justified if the concentration camp, the people interned in concentration camps during the Holocaust, you know, what if they had done some military act that, you know, overthrew the concentration camp or attempted to overthrow the concentration camp, and if it done some bad things in the process, you know, would you condemn their insurrection against the concentration camp? And I suspect the answer is no, even if they did some things that you considered regrettable. And I would suggest that you think of it in that framing, because Gaza is a concentration camp and should be understood properly as that. It's an attempt to carry out a full-scale genocide of the people within its borders. So with that in mind, I think that, you know, when you're reading any sort of like Western press that's reporting on what took place during October 7th, that you should regard it with not just a grain of salt, but a mountain of salt, and then you should compare it to other sources. Crux says, I can understand the desperation, etc. Trust me, it isn't about being judgmental. It's about actually knowing what happened. I was told about images of certain acts that then I was told was fake. There were descriptions that there were images being, you know, distributed around of atrocities that were carried out. But then when you look into it, those images are nowhere to be found. And then supposedly they've only ever been shown to individuals in the state. And that's it. It was never shown outside. And I suspect that's because that if these were shown to the broader public, they would be subjected to scrutiny by journalists and academics who would probably find that they were fake, if I had to guess. But those images, as far as I understand, there's no proof that these supposed images that Israel have of Palestine, or rather of during October 7th, the supposed things that took place during October 7th, they don't actually have these images, or if they do, they're not making them available to anyone, which suggests they probably don't exist, or if they do exist, that they're fake. Filipino educator activist says, hello, watching from the Philippines. That's awesome. Super glad you're here. Yeah, Crux, all I would say is, if you find the images, I think you'd be the first person. What I've heard is that Israel keeps claiming they have supposed images, but that they only ever show them to powerful people in private. They don't ever show the public. And that given that Israel has basically no compunction of saying anything it likes, I'm very doubtful that any images they have are therefore real, or that those images are then real. Long Defiant says, if you had a magic wand and could eliminate one misconception about anarchism, what would it be? Probably that anarchism believes in individualist chaos, and that that anarchism does not entail broader coordination and building organizational structures. I think that is the biggest hurdle that I've found to getting people to understand anarchism, is that it is very, very hard to convince them that anarchism is not just individualist chaos and do as thou wilt, basically. Crux, just to be clear, I'm not infallible. So if you find it, you know, take that with, you know, whatever consideration necessary. But this is just my understanding of what's going on with what you're talking about. Miss Elaine Dumont says, hey, serious question. I wanted to start a YouTube channel for a long time, but never can never settle on a topic to tackle first. Even though I have a shitload of possibilities, got a suggestion maybe? Go wherever your passion takes you. That's really what I would say is super important. Because like, you know, surely you've got all kinds of different options that are available to you, but probably only one or two of them really are going to stand out as like, these are the ones I want to do. Because the ones you want to do are the ones you're more likely to actually pursue. And the ones you're more likely to pursue are the ones that you're more likely to finish. And the ones you're more likely to finish are the ones that you're going to actually publish on your channel. And I think that's really the important part. Because at the end of the day, so much of doing a YouTube channel is about finding ways to self-motivate. And if you can't find a way to self-motivate, it's going to be really hard to do the channel. So I would say really like go wherever your passion takes you. Spartacus says, what is the anarchist conception of alienation? So, you know, anarchists don't really talk about the topic of alienation, but, or rather, they don't use the word they don't use the word alienation in their work. But I think what you'll find is that Marx's theory of alienation is really like most robustly considered within anarchism. It's just that these ideas of alienation that Marx talks about in his theory of alienation are extended to understand political alienation, not just economic alienation. So Marxists really think, you know, they're thinking about economic alienation, and anarchists too are as well, but anarchists are extending this concept of alienation to also include political alienation. And I think that's really an important part. You know, in my work, I'm talking about alienation of power, the alienation of those who do from making decisions about what they do. That is to say, the disconnection between decision making and implementation. You know, we all implement the decisions of other people. We don't make decisions ourselves. And that's a form of political alienation is what I would call it. Crux says, okay, real talk. I know you got ADHD. I don't know how intense it is. What are your strats for living with or accounting for that? Executive dysfunction holds me back quite a bit. I got to be honest, a large part of my life is about mitigating my executive dysfunction. A lot. I spend way, way, way more time than any of you could ever imagine trying to work through my executive dysfunction. I've learned to just kind of white knuckle through it in a lot of occasions. I've learned to do things when I don't get any dopamine for them. That has required a lot of hard work, but also I should just say that I am using like all kinds of different things to help me. Like one is, stimulants, like I'm on Adderall. Adderall often helps. Sometimes I don't take it because it has negative side effects that I don't really care for. But when I'm on Adderall, I am a much better functioning person. I can get a lot more done. And that's part of it. I've noticed that for me, my executive dysfunction is way, way worse when my inflammation is really high. So I found that, for example, if I just reduce the amount of carbs that are in my diet, if I just try to reduce almost down to zero, all at once, my executive dysfunction starts going away and my brain fog starts going away and I function a lot better. It's kind of led me to a hypothesis that ADHD is related to whole body inflammation and that the brain inflammation is what's causing brain fog and it's what's causing the executive dysfunction. So for me personally, sometimes I'll go long spans of time on keto. But lately I've been trying to build muscle and I've been very successful at it. My body is like naturally good at building muscle. But it has meant that I need to consume more carbohydrates, and in step with consuming more carbohydrates, my brain fog came back, my executive dysfunction came back. And, also I've been feeling kind of emotionally dysregulated. And so it's hard. It's hard to manage executive dysfunction because to manage executive dysfunction, you kind of have to like use some executive function. But yeah, go to the gym. That'll help. Lower the amount of inflammation in your body. I think that's a big thing I would recommend. I bet that'll work. I've used all kinds of different ways of lowering inflammation. There are or things that reduce cortisol. It's another thing. So you probably are also having, if I had to guess, you're probably feeling stressed all the time. And the more stressed you are, probably the more executive dysfunction you have, if I had to guess. But yeah. Legend Link says ecological alienation is also very real. Both capital and the state have alienated us from Earth. We're seeing the effects of that this century. Agreed, 1000%. Agreed. Thurna says, I wondered because I felt the same when I have goods like bread, and I wondered if it was gluten. I mean, maybe it's gluten, but I think that just like, I don't know. I mean, don't take my word with too much credibility on this because I have no medical training and I'm really not a biologist, even an amateur biologist. But this is just my understanding is that it kind of seems like in my own experience that inflammation directly corresponds with brain fog and executive dysfunction. So, I mean, you know, all of you can give that a try and see if it helps you. NLH says, Anark, what are some things Marxists agree with that you don't agree with? Not authoritarian leftists, but orthodox Marxists. I just disagree with the Marxist definition of the state. I think that the Marxist definition of the state is endlessly confusing and really set up the Marxist tradition to fall into opportunism and counter-revolutionary tendencies because it was going to guarantee that people then tried to institute something that was more like a traditional state, even though perhaps Marx and Engels' conception of a state was nothing like the state we currently have. It doesn't really matter because once you've called it a state, people are then going to draw strong parallels between them. And it doesn't matter if they spend all that time trying to clarify and drawing all these distinctions and talking about different states coming from different economic paradigms and so on and so on. All that sort of just fell by the wayside when people took power and they pretty much never even tried to abolish the state. Instead, it seems like they solidified what was more a traditional authoritarian state and, you know, just developing hierarchical power structures. I think that that's probably the biggest one, in my opinion. I think that's the biggest mistake of Marx. Marx was also, he had too much faith that if all you did was just seize hierarchical powers and then you could just like steer them in the right direction. Like Marx, you know, early on was, especially before the Paris Commune, was much more pro-electoralism, was much more about like, you know, seizing, you know, structures as they currently are in order to move them in the right direction. And I think Marx really didn't believe in this idea of sort of an insurrection against the current state of things, and that it was really the Paris Commune that convinced him otherwise, and Engels as well. You can find this. That's why you can find this letter of Engels to Babel talking about, you know, we should drop all of the palaver of the state and begin calling it the commune. And I think that was one of their biggest mistakes, and it was directly responsible for the sort of counter-revolutionary tendencies that have become very prevalent in Marxism. AJ Prince says, do you have any best practices when in a dialogue with someone who has a lot of internalized diagonalist ideas and analysis? Seems like they're 70% of the way there, but they always go conspiratorial. Well, I don't know what diagonalist means, but I can say, I mean, just commenting on the last part about always going conspiratorial. Like, I think it's important not to, I mean, given all of the Epstein disclosures, it's important for us not to pretend that there is not conspiracies going on behind closed doors. I think that, however, what you should be trying to emphasize is that these conspiracies are really only able to be so successful because hierarchical power structures exist that they can exploit. You know, think about the fact that if there is, tens of thousands of councils, hundreds of thousands of councils that comprise of millions or billions of people, that's so much harder to carry out a conspiracy, because then you can't just carry out a conspiracy behind closed doors, because you have to convince billions of people to agree with you. Whereas in a hierarchical power structure, there's very few people that make most of the decisions. And therefore, a conspiracy really only has to involve the few people that are at the very top of the hierarchy, because those are the people that are making the decisions. And therefore, conspiracies become much more powerful within a hierarchical power structure. And that's why no matter what hierarchical power structure you develop, it's going to be more susceptible to, conspiracies of the hierarchs. So I think that that is a big part of how I would always try to approach those topics. Legend Link says, how do you feel about angles on the origins of family, private property, and the state? It's the only thing about angles I find value in, although it's some outdated anthropology. I think that's pretty much my perspective. Although I think the outdated anthropology does hurt the book quite a bit. But personally, I think Anti-During is the most valuable thing that Engels produced. Anti-During has the most valuable critique in it. I have only read like selections of on the origins of family. I haven't read the whole thing all the way through. But the anthropology that's in it is so outdated, it's kind of painful at some points. Knowledge and Defense says, do you not think you're giving Hamas too much credit? In my opinion, they are not a genuine liberatory force against ethnic cleansing, unlike the YPG, for example. I didn't really make any claims that they were like a genuine liberatory force. I think that they're a national liberation campaign of a people inside of a concentration camp. You know, like, once again, like going back to our example of, Jews in a concentration camp during the Holocaust, I would still support an uprising, even if that uprising comprised, was, led by some authoritarian group of Jews within the concentration camps. I still would have supported it. I would be critical of what was going to become if they got the power, because obviously with that power, they would try to put in place something authoritarian, and therefore it would probably become like shooting yourself in the foot, but it would be better than living in a concentration camp. Like, I don't really think I've given them any more credit than they're due. Even if they were Zionists, we're talking about the concentration camps. Are you like, obviously some of those Jews that were in the Holocaust were Zionists. I don't really think that means that we should want the Holocaust to take place. Like, kind of seems crazy. It's just, it's a matter of survival, as Jessica says. Isn't there another option? I don't think there is. I think Fanon's analysis in Wretched of the Earth is correct. I think that you're not going to, when you are like in a concentration camp, you get out by violence. I don't really think you can escape that. I'm not saying that, once again, like I support Hamas. I mean, I support the national liberation of the Palestinian people. But I mean, like, as you say, Hamas as a force has been very reactionary, and it was literally brought into existence by Zionist interests because they thought that it was the most polarizing and negative form of the Palestinian liberation movement. But it should be said that at this point, the coalition of Palestinian forces is not just Hamas, and is now a coalition of various forces that are all resisting, the genocide by Israel. Long Defiant points something out correct here. I think the Palestinians tried to choose another option during the Great Marches of Return in 2018. Yeah, I mean, the Palestinians tried all kinds of other ways of doing this. They really did. Yeah, as Long Defiant says, during the peaceful Great Marches of Return, the IDF shot people in the knees. Yeah, I mean, they tried. They tried, and it just did not work. And I really just don't think it can work. I missed a bunch of questions up above. Yeah, exactly. Pacifist means or peaceful means only work on people of conscience. And I think the Israeli state just is clearly a fascist state. It has no conscience. Damn, there's been a lot of questions here. Chaotic Franz, how did you come to the conclusion that laziness exists? The things you say about it seem like the language of the oppressors with a leftist coat of paint, to be honest. I don't really know where I mentioned laziness here. You'll have to be specific. Legend Link says, I think that Maoism and Xi Jinping thought are the main off-left things anarchists should be currently critiquing. Orthodox Leninism is not very popular worldwide these days. Yeah, well, I do think like Xi Jinping thought is definitely growing. There's no doubt. But also, even though, yes, it is extremely erroneous, very, very badly informed, it also is not going to do, well, I think its biggest risk is not that it's going to get people to do something harmful, actively harmful in our conditions. It's really just that it demobilizes people, you know, this sort of Dengism, this post-Dengist thought in China. This stuff demobilizes people. It convinces people they should wait on some foreign savior rather than organizing within their conditions. That's really what I think one of the major issues with this and like a third worldist approach is this idea that, you know, if you're anywhere but the third world, or if you're anywhere but China, you're just, there's nothing you can do besides, you know, lick the boot of China or pray that the third world is going to rise up any day now and liberate the planet. You know, I think that these are extremely counterproductive, and what these really lead to is an ineffectual movement that therefore does not develop the power to really change conditions, which is crucially necessary. Conditions must be changed. And so given that conditions must be changed and that all of us are going to have to put our backs into it, then it's really important that all of us everywhere are doing the work of developing organizations and networks of power structures that are going to be capable of overthrowing the states in all of our different regions. And it should also be said, like, let's imagine that the third worldist perspective is correct and that the revolution can only happen in the third world. Okay, well, what happens when finally they get to this region and they're fighting a war, a direct war to overthrow or destroy the United States? Okay, let's imagine that happens. And they get here and there's no resistance movement, and the whole movement is just like, well, we just basically sat on our hands and spread propaganda hoping that you would come save us. Thank you for coming to save us. And like, there's no power structures here. I think that will just essentially mean that if they were to finally get to the United States, and therefore, let's imagine that this third worldist idea were actually real, you know, they would get here and then destroy the United States government, then like, what would actually be done in the aftermath? There would be no power structures that could seize that vacuum, and that would probably then just lead to enormous civil strife, and it would not lead to a liberatory campaign. It's very important, even if you imagine that you're waiting on some third world savior, they begin building the power structures in the here and now, which would be capable of filling the vacuum after the fall of the empire. So I think all these perspectives which convince you that the revolution is going going to happen elsewhere, this is the most destructive thing that a revolutionary can be convinced of. Many people have also pointed to Lenin believing that the revolution was going to happen in Germany when he was there in Russia, when they'd already instituted, networks of Soviets that already were themselves far more revolutionary than anything happening in Germany. And Lenin supposedly, according to various sources, sort of sat on his hands thinking that he was waiting for Germany to follow behind. And Germany, of course, never did follow behind. And that should really remind you that this is not about waiting for someone else to do it. You need to start now. And I do think that that's the biggest danger of Dengism or quote unquote Xi Jinping thought. I think that's the big danger of those. Not Serial says, what do you think about left composition of opposing all national liberation movements? Understandable, but as an specificist, I think the solution is always just going to be social insertion. When I look at a movement arising, which does not have an anarchist character, I think that you don't quote unquote oppose it. What you do instead is you socially insert into that movement and you bring out the anarchic or horizontal elements that are within it. So I certainly I don't really like this language of the us. I understand like the idea of, all of the critiques I've made of national liberation movements. I still believe all of those critiques, but that does not stop the fact that those national liberation movements are the social movement, as a specificist would call it. And it's not really up to us what the character of the social movement is. It's only up to us how we engage in that social movement and how we practice social insertion to bring out its more anarchic elements. Lumpen Lodge. Bro, just embrace Marx. Marx is cool. See, here's the funny thing. Once you learn how to read critically, once you learn how to kind of hold your own ideas and to test concepts against the world, what you become capable of doing is reading different theorists and recognizing where they're right and wrong and being able to understand what the foundations of their ideas are and then understand where those foundations are mistaken, where we've had updates, where their ideas have a further extension that they didn't recognize. Once you become capable of that, then you really don't, it's much harder to just kind of fall into a particular theorist as being the end all be all. The only way I think you do that is when you sort of obsessively study one theorist and you don't practice critical thinking skills and you don't develop the ability to compare and contrast different philosophical perspectives. But I did not just read Marx all by himself. I started by learning about philosophy and logic and science, and those gave me such a strong foundation that when I started learning about Marx, I realized what parts of Marx were really good and very inspiring, and those parts have stuck with me. And then I also realized what parts of Marx that I didn't think were correct. And there have been more parts even since I first started learning about Marx that I've learned that I don't agree with Marx on. And that means that I'm not going to just accept the light of Marxism because Marx is just one thinker, and he had a lot of good ideas. Marx was a brilliant guy. I just want to say, no authoritarian leftist has ever soured me against Marx. I still consider Marx to be one of the most brilliant theorists who's ever lived. And I adore his prose. I think that he has some of the most beautiful passages that any theorist has ever written, and has many insights that are hard to match in the breadth of other theory. I just don't think that he had the whole picture. I think that Marx was mostly an economic theorist. I think that he did not really understand power more broadly. And this is the reason why I'm not a Marxist, is because I think that Marxists don't have an understanding of power. I think that they lack an understanding of power structures more broadly. And I think that anarchists essentially have a more robust analysis that is much bigger than Marxism. Marx's ideas can easily fit within anarchism, but anarchism is a much bigger critique than Marxism. It has a lot more to it. Anarchism starts with the power analysis, and that power analysis leads you to understand how all forms of power function. You begin to understand how individual conditioning functions. You begin to understand how interpersonality reproduces power structures. You begin to then recognize how social structures and even environmental structures reinforce power structures. And at that point, it becomes more and more clear that Marxism does not contain enough to understand the world, the whole political world. It's very, very detailed analysis of the economy, and then a bunch of kind of vulgarizations that were built on top of Marx, which falsely understood political power structures. Yeah, as Long Defiant says, I find Marxist class analysis informative and valuable, but insufficient. That's exactly how I see it. Jessica says, hey, Anark, in your experience, do you find that many Marxist academics don't engage deeply with anarchist theory? I sometimes hear stereotypical understandings of anarchism from some Marxist academics. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that academia is like very much biased towards Marxism. And I think that just genuinely comes from a lack of reading about anarchism. So if what you do is you start with Marxism, one of the things that happens is you start by reading a bunch of straw men of anarchism. And Marxism is just full of straw men of anarchism. And that's because Marxists, I think, kind of like deep down inside, they know what I just said earlier. And that is that they're lacking an understanding or lacking a theory of power. And because they're lacking a theory of power, they have to attack the more robust analysis, which is anarchism. And they have to tear down anarchism. They have to strawman it. They have to belittle and misrepresent it. And so then it becomes sort of a rite of passage for Marxists to pretend that they have some profound critique of anarchism, when really I've never seen a single Marxist produce a valid critique of anarchism. It's always a straw man, always. The only people I've seen produce good critiques of anarchists are anarchists. Anarchist tendencies are the only ones that pay close enough attention to how the other tendencies work to understand how to critique anarchism itself. And so, yeah, if you're a Marxist academic, you've probably read tons of texts which contain straw men and fallacious reasoning about anarchism. And you've probably, in that capacity, convinced yourself that these are strong positions to take against anarchism, when all they really are is polemical stances in a sectarian rivalry, not strong theoretical critiques. Booty Broth says, Marx critiqued Proudhon well, to be fair. I do think that Marx has some good critiques of Proudhon, but I do think that even a lot of the things he said about Proudhon were false. And this can be seen in Proudhon's response to Marx. Proudhon responds to Marx and reads through Marx's characterizations of him, and Proudhon points out several places where Marx is just mischaracterizing him and creating straw men of his position. That being said, there are some places where him and Proudhon and Marx just disagree. And on most of those places where Proudhon and Marx disagree, I actually agree with Marx. But there are also various places where Marx strawmans Proudhon. And he kind of is just like very aggressive polemic at various points. You said, I don't think Proudhon. Yeah, Proudhon. No, I think, let's see here. No, I mean, I've already found a letter from Proudhon to Marx here. Let's see. Yeah, all I typed was Proudhon response to Marx. I think there's the one I found was short, but I'm pretty sure there's a longer version that I've read through. Lumpen Lodge says the only reason the Zapatistas are viewed as anarchists is because they haven't been granted statehood. They're not asking for statehood. So that doesn't really make any sense. That's incorrect. That's misinformation. NLH says, Anark, I've honestly not read any Proudhon, but was thinking about giving What is Property a read. Is it worth it? I mean, if you want to understand the history of socialism, it's absolutely worth it. What is Property is said to have been the reason that Karl Marx became a socialist. In fact, if you read What is Property, you will find the foundations of Marx's ideas contained there. And some people have even suggested that the reason why Marx became so polemic against Proudhon was because he wanted to try to separate himself from Proudhon so people didn't recognize how much he had cribbed directly from Proudhon. So Proudhon is very important. I think you'll find that if you read it, there'll be portions that you disagree with. But I think if you'll read it, you'll also be astounded to see how far before everyone else that he was saying a lot of the things that we now take for granted as being the core positions of socialism. Got a $20 donation from Sody Pop. He said, I'd have a question lined up, but I completely missed this stream's announcement. Anyway, hope you and everyone watching is doing well. Well, I appreciate you, Sody Pop. Appreciate the $20 and appreciate you tuning in. Long nose boy. I saw a Marxist critique of anarchism recently and was pleased to hear them spend the first 10 minutes complaining that Marxists often strawman anarchism only for them to do the same thing. Yeah, no, I just think that they refuse to read anarchist texts. And I don't really understand why, other than that they are afraid that they will be proven wrong in the process. Like when I see anarchists critiquing Marxism, they read Marxist texts. Like I've read Lenin, I've read Stalin, I've read Mao, I've read Trotsky, I've read a bunch of these people, and I can easily just tell you what my disagreements are. And I wrote an entire series of essays telling you what my disagreements were. And every time that I see anarchists critique Marxists, they like have a pretty strong understanding of Marxism. But when I see Marxists critique anarchism, it's like, wow, you didn't even read an introduction to anarchism. Like, your entire research about anarchism was researching where other Marxists strawmanned anarchism. You didn't ever go to the trouble to learn about anarchism just by reading anarchists, which to me is kind of mind-blowing. I just find that to be such a glaring admission by these Marxists that they are intimidated by anarchism. They're intimidated by what it might point out as failures of their ideology. They're terrified that it might expose the cracks in their perspective. And they have such a strong dogmatic attachment to Marxist ideas that is too much, that they just cannot tolerate the idea that there would be any flaw in their concepts. It's very dogmatic. Yeah, and then Legend Link says, and if they read anarchist texts, they read really old ones. Yeah, they read like Proudhon instead of even Bakunin would be better to read than Proudhon. Reading Bakunin at least like gives you kind of a taste of modern anarchism, like, or anarchism of the contemporary era. They should just read. Why don't they read Farge or something? Like they just never read anything up to date. Yeah, I mean, as Oakley says, I find they're just incurious dogmatists. That's exactly right. AJ Prince says, do you have any thoughts on the unfreedom theory about free will and moral responsibility being something the movement would benefit from moving beyond? So I actually know Aaron. Aaron is a friend of mine and has been a co-organizer of mine here in Tulsa. And yeah, I also don't believe in free will. I don't think it's necessary. Moral responsibility, I think, is a different matter. You know, a car doesn't have free will, but if we were to say, you know, the car's engine was failing, we would still say that the problem is the engine failing. We would still say the onus on was the car failing, right? That isn't to say that, you know, that there's a moral judgment. It's just a statement about the engine failing. And insofar as we're talking about moral responsibility as like, justice is about like correcting wrongs and preventing further ones from being done, we have to recognize the same kinds of things are taking place. So me and Aaron disagree about this concept of freedom because I don't think freedom entails free will. I think freedom is just about the range of possibilities that a thing has access to. And so, you know, he's also a hard determinist. But, you know, me and him have had disagreements about this particular issue. Like, if there's hard determinism, there is no range of possibilities, is what he says. And what I say is that's not true. You know, for example, this mic is on an arm, right? Okay, so it's on this arm. And, okay, so it's only ever going to orient one position of all the possible positions that it has. But it has all those possible positions nonetheless. These are called degrees of freedom. This is what we talk about in physics. And these degrees of freedom exist, and they change the behavior of how this mic is going to work in the world and what sorts of states it will be able to take up in its future. It cannot take up a state which it does not contain as one of its possibilities. This is important. This is also something we look at in physics. In physics, we talk about the possible states of a given system. And interestingly, you can understand the physical dynamics of a system by understanding the possible states that system can take up, right? You look at the possible ways that system can be oriented. And by looking at all of the possible ways it can be oriented, you therefore come to an understanding of its broader systemic dynamics. And this is actually very, very fundamental. This is part of how quantum mechanics is laid out. Like, quantum mechanics is based on this principle of degrees of freedom. And the statistical analysis of those degrees of freedom essentially robustly gives you quantum dynamics or quantum physics. And so I disagree with this idea that just because there may only be one outcome, that therefore the degrees of freedom are irrelevant. And so therefore I don't really agree that we should get rid of the concept of freedom. Sunny Bun 1 gave $5. They said, have you read Against Method, Outline of an Anarchistic Theory of Knowledge and Science in a Free Society by Paul Feyerabend? All I've read is summaries and overviews, and I do not agree. I'm just not that's not me. I am more of a structural realist. And I do not take that to have anything. I don't take Feyerabend to actually have anything to do with anarchism. I think that him being related to anarchism is just people misusing the word anarchism to mean no structure. And I disagree with his understandings from what I've read, from the summaries that I've read. I think that, in fact, there are structures to the world, that our methods are, it really is just about getting closer and closer and closer to the structures of the world as they really are. And I do believe that there is an actual structure of logic, and I actually believe that logic underpins the entire universe. I believe that mathematics is a language that we are every day getting closer and closer to understanding its truth, and that truth accords to a functionality of how the universe functions once again. I do not believe in this sort of subjectivist, a post-structuralist perspective. I do not hold those sorts of positions. Hypnosis says, how could you be a determinist and believe in free will? I am a determinist and I do not believe in free will. I'm a hard determinist and I do not believe in free will. So I don't know if maybe, I don't know if you're pointing to me. Oh, okay. You're talking to Crux. Okay. I see. Jessica says, what about human agency? Critical realism, a lens that Graeber used, suggests that even conditioned humans have some agency and can act back on the system that influenced them. Well, I believe that it's true that people can act back on the system that influences them. I don't believe that everything is strictly determined. I don't think that we have an over-determination of human action by prevailing social systems. Human action is conditioned by all kinds of things. You know, it's conditioned by our interaction with the universe and our loved ones and our own internal ideas, which develop from the interactions of our neurons, which themselves can produce new things. I don't believe that just because I'm a hard determinist, that doesn't mean I believe that social systems strictly determine people's actions. Wow, got $40 from Melkor. He said, we've got to have money. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I definitely need it. I'm poor as fuck. The Wind Cow says, hey, Anark, will tribalism between anarchist groups be a problem in the future? And if so, how do we stop it from happening? I think that in an anarchist world, in an anarchic hegemony, as you might call it, that absolutely there would be tribalism and absolutely there would be feuds between different tendencies. I think that in a world after we had like anarchic hegemony or horizontal hegemony, whatever you want to call it, I think that that would be one of the main splits in society. It would be between more individualist and more social anarchist perspectives. The second part was, how do we stop it from happening? I think that we have to develop systems which mediate our disagreements, and we have to engage in rigorous academic discourse rather than mudslinging. Knowledge and Defense says, what do you think about the Marxist idea that rapid international victory is required because of how connected everything is in the world market? Else, how do you keep your industry independent? I mean, I understand the argument, and it's not only a Marxist argument. Anarchists have made similar arguments. It's a generally considered to be kind of part and parcel of a more internationalist perspective. I just don't think that's true. I think it makes sense. The argument is robust and the theoretical underpinning makes sense. I just think that in practice that is probably not going to happen. I just don't think there's going to be some rapid series of continental victories that are all going to happen all at the same time, because I think that development is always going to be uneven. Development of political consciousness, development of power structures, prefiguration, the development of networks of prefigurative bodies, the development of different nations, their means of production, and the development of their forms of domination and oppression, that's always going to be uneven. and therefore you're never going to just get some big universal wave. What you're going to have is a bunch of pockets, all of them doing the work to develop as far as they can under prefigurative methods, with a recognition that they have to be able to live within the world as it currently stands, while also always transitioning toward the future state of horizontal hegemony. And that is the goal, and that I hope for this international wave that that I suppose was considered the ideal to aspire to in the late 1800s and maybe in the early 1900s. But I do not see evidence that this is likely to be the way that revolution is carried out across the planet. NLH says, Anark, I like to mudsling back with non-anarchists. How do I stop from mudslinging? I would say that, like, it kind of depends on the context. Like, I think there are times where it's necessary to dispute the mischaracterizations of anarchism and to argue vigorously with people who are making, who are opportunists and counter-revolutionaries and all those other things. But I also think that we should choose our fights. We should ask ourselves, like, to what degree is this person actually a harm, and to what degree is this person just an annoyance or a nuisance? And if it's in the latter occasion, I would say that for the most part, those people should just be kind of ignored. That's why I don't argue on Twitter as much, because I think it's mostly the latter. I think most of them don't really have any power to affect outcomes. Acidic Harmony says, I don't even see how we can take a firm stance either way on free will. Seems like science has nothing to analyze seriously there. I personally disagree. I think science points towards hard determinism. I think that people can make the argument that quantum mechanics has its probabilistic outcomes, but the problem is those probabilistic outcomes don't cascade into macro scale objects. So there's no real, like, quantum indeterminacy at our scale. Everything is fully determinist at our scale. And so I think it's pretty well, in my perspective, it's a solved problem. I think it's a solved problem. Determinism has been proved for a very long time. I think that ever since Newton, we've had determinism just kind of locked down as the only viable option, and that the survival of free will is mostly people's desire to imagine the concept of an agent who freely moves through the pool of options, rather than an agent that is strictly determined and makes decisions based on the history of their personhood and their interaction with the environment. Crux says, part of what determined it was your decision making. Okay, but the problem is your decision making was determined by previous things. So, like, if you trace that back, eventually you go back to you being an embryo, and then you trace that back, and eventually you go back to your parents having sex, and you trace that back, and eventually you just, like, get back to the Big Bang. And so it really doesn't seem to me like you having a decision making process in the middle of a deterministic chain really gets you outside of the deterministic chain. As Dude Ryan says, quantum probabilistic causality is still not your will, it's randomness, which is also outside of your control. So either our will is random at a quantum level or completely deterministic. Exactly. And neither of those make room for free will. So it's either that everything is purely deterministic, or your decisions are being determined by a roulette wheel. And neither of those get you free will. Jessica says, do you think intelligent life exists somewhere else in the universe, or are we alone? I think it's almost a guarantee that intelligent life exists somewhere else in the universe. I'd say many forms of intelligent life probably exist in the universe. I think that it would be almost impossible to imagine that they don't. That would just be very surprising. Rotten Mouse says, "Hey, Anark, got a question I've been struggling with. Am I wrong for thinking that providing gender affirming care to people who join the military incentivizes people to join, and that's bad?" No, I mean, I don't agree with that. I think it's like saying that, if somebody needed diabetic care, they would get that in the military, or, there's a variety of things, you get access to medical care when you go into the military, but I think very few people are joining the military to get medical care. So I don't think that's probably what's going on. So Crux says, yes, but those things being influenced by previous material processes outside of decision-making doesn't make a choice entirely false. I didn't say it made it false. I just said that choice was determined by its background. And I wouldn't say it's mostly deterministic. I would say it's fully deterministic, and that emergence is a deterministic process. Emergence is determined precisely by the foundations that made the emergence. Flinder says, where do your ancestors come from? England and Germany. What do I think of the Fermi paradox? I think that there are many different possibilities for why that's taking place. I think one of them is it's possible that interstellar travel is just astoundingly difficult, yo. It's possible that it's just way harder than we think it is, or rather that it's as hard as we think it is. It's possible that just traveling distances light years is just not something that even a ridiculously advanced species can do easily. That even we have millions of them, that still maybe only one or two of them ever achieve it. It just might be that interstellar travel is astoundingly challenging. Might also be that it's like, think about it this way. If there's ever only going to be, let's imagine it's a low number. Let's imagine there's only ever going to be 10 fully sentient or fully sapient species that ever arise in the universe. Okay. And, you're smearing that out over the course of billions of years. Well, maybe it's if there's 10, billions divided by 10. And it's possible they just don't survive longer than that, and that they just don't overlap. It's possible that, there's been 3 sapient species that have existed in the universe before us, and they're just gone now. They've just died out. And, just like the sapient species come and go. That's one option. Another one is just that they are few enough that when we look out into space, we just have not seen their signal yet. We don't monitor the whole sky every single day, 24/7 in astounding James Webb depth. We look at chunks of the sky in James Webb depth, and that's how we see all that detail. We're not looking all over the universe all the time. So if we haven't gotten a signal, it's really not a demonstration that they're not out there. It's more a demonstration that that would be very, very improbable to see them out there. I think that it's very possible that we've just missed their signal. The signal's out there and we just don't see it because we're not seeing everything all at once. It's another possibility. I mean, there's a lot of possibilities like that that are just kind of mundane, and they still describe the outcomes. NLH says, Anark, progressives and MLs on social media are rapidly abandoning prison and police abolition. This is still a popular position among a lot of the oppressed masses. Anarchists should hold the line. Yeah, 1,000%. 1,000%. Anarchists should hold the line on all these liberatory perspectives, because anarchists are sort of the repository of all these liberatory perspectives. You know, other tendencies may falter. Other tendencies may act as opportunists, only doing and saying what they think is convenient at the moment in order to appease the social movement. But anarchists are the ones that are sort of the repository of those most radical values within every social movement. And I think that here, of course, we see that prison and police abolition are yet another one where the anarchist perspective is the driving ethos of the real movement. And then once the real movement begins to fall off, then all of the opportunists will expose themselves as having really never given a shit about the positions, the liberatory positions of the real movement. Yeah, as Sam says, they will also abolish ICE when the time comes. You just watch. Yeah, they absolutely will. They absolutely will. Yeah, as Kurulinu says about the Fermi paradox, we're barely looking all over our own planet. Yeah, imagine that somewhere on this planet, there's like one molecule that is signaling to us that it wants to be found. And then you think to yourself, like, if that were like somewhere in some obscure portion of the ocean or something, what's the likelihood that we would see that one little molecule signaling to us? And now imagine that is so much more likely for us to see that molecule than for us to just see like one planet orbiting one star in one galaxy in the immensity of space. You know, I just want us to really keep our scales in mind here. All right, be right back. Gotta use the restroom. I have returned. Where's the kitty? I don't know where either cat is, to be honest. Yeah, I don't see either of them right now. I think they're in the back. They don't like me talking nonstop. Legend Link says, what text did you get your hard determinist perspective from? I'll just answer that part. I did not get that from anything. It's my own reasoning, just looking at evidence, to be honest. And can you briefly explain emergence again in that context? I don't think really emergence gains anything from being understood in a non-deterministic context. Emergence just comes from the collusion of many elements under very particular conditions. You know, those particular conditions lead to emergent properties. I don't think emergence really gains anything from being understood in a non-deterministic perspective. It is not piss colored. It is white. It's white colored. Booty Broth says, can you explain the evolution of platformism into especifismo? Well, it's interesting. The other day I was hearing Felipe Correa claim that really especifismo did not, like, quote unquote, develop from platformism. That platformism developed, and then many years later, the specifists, what we now call the specifists, developed a theory of especifismo, which essentially was like very similar to platformism. And that the most real contact they had with the foundations of platformism were just the texts by Bakunin and some interaction with the Malatesta's critiques of the platform. Zolthar says, I do wonder what a master list of anarchist stuff on the internet would look like. I mean, I guess the anarchist library is a great start, but I think you were probably meaning like also like media and YouTube channels and streams and stuff like that. Knowledge in Defense says, what if an incredibly important exporter like China gets overthrown in a revolution and then refuses to trade with other countries anymore? Wouldn't other economies undergo shocks as a result? Yes, I'm just not sure how that's relevant to what we discussed. Like, absolutely. Just what is that? Why is that? What is that in reference to? Got a $20 donation from Sam. He says, for your information, the inevitable split appears close for DSA. The NPC, National, just threatened to take voting power from the members, and NYC DSA Treasurer threatened to split because the chapter is 1/3 of the annual budget in response. Yeah, I mean, the thing is that it's been rational for there to be a split in the DSA for a long time. And I think at this point that anarchists and libertarian socialists more broadly have really overstayed in the DSA. And there's been various attempts to get the LSC to split from the DSA. I mean, you know, we experienced this years ago. Me and you were talking about it like early on in this conflict, and it just has never come to fruition. And I think the only reason it hasn't come to fruition is because everybody who's involved really sees DSA as this site of power that they all want access to. You know, it's continually like running sock dims and winning, and people feel like it's the place where like all of this really important organizing is taking place. And so you have a variety of tendencies that are sticking around, not because they feel like the DSA really represents their interests in a particular way, but because they feel like the DSA is such a powerful vehicle that, you know, they're having a hard time pulling themselves away from its influence because they don't want to lose their relevance by proxy to their ability to control or to influence the DSA. So we'll see. I think right now, I will believe it when I see it. Hypnosis says, please explain how DSA is not a social insertion target. I think it's important to understand that in social insertion, we're not talking about inserting ourselves into political organizations. I guess I'll make a distinction here. So there's what's called the social movement. The social movement is the organic uprising of the people. This is the target of social insertion. So like the George Floyd uprisings, that's the social movement. Political organizations are just organizations that are constructed with a political aim, that have a platform that makes them that orients them towards some form, ideology, some political perspective, and then they act in the world by way of that political perspective. And social insertion is aimed at the social movement, whereas DSA is a political organization. And Specifismo is specifically predicated on trying to get anarchists not to work within other political organizations, but instead to, if all of the political work they do, trying to develop a political organization, trying to use that work in order to bolster the specifically anarchist organization and to make that organization their home and to make it the vehicle for change, rather than to do entryism into other political organizations in order to alter the program of those political organizations. Instead, the work of the specifist is to engage in political work under the umbrella of their political organization, the specifically anarchist organization, and then to engage in the social movement through what is called entryism. And so I think that is the distinction you're looking for. Flinder says, what do you mean that you say when you say you experience executive dysfunction? Is that when you feel unproductive and like you don't want to do anything? No, executive dysfunction is when you do want to do something, you just can't force yourself to do it. Like, you know, you wake up and your brain says, oh, wow, I really, really need to go to the store and get body wash. And then you're sitting there like, I really want to go get body wash. I need to go get body wash. And you're like, oh, I want to go get body wash. And you just can't force yourself. You can't force yourself to just get up and then go get in the car and go get body wash. It's not that you don't want to. You do want to, but you cannot connect this desire to action. And that's executive dysfunction. Zane Simmons says, have you considered collaborating with the Line's live call-in show? Their hosts are friendly to anarchist adjacent philosophy, and they do a good job of expanding their viewers' origin window. I haven't heard of them, to be honest. The Line. Yeah, I'm not familiar. Maymar says, have you played the new Halo game yet? No, I haven't played. I haven't played Halo games in a long time at this point. I haven't been playing a lot of video games in a while. Been playing mostly like tabletop RPGs. Last video game I played was Space Marine 2, and that shit fucking slapped. That game's awesome. Super DBZ Killer says, do you think anarchist praxis is only viable for those who are dispositionally confrontational and self-directed? For those of us who aren't, for example, people pleasers, risk averse, what does that leave? No. I think that presumes that anarchist praxis is like all street politics and like protesting and sabotage. Most of what I advocate as anarchist praxis is community building, which honestly, being a people pleaser can be very valuable. Like, I mean, I think that's a bad trait overall, but like in that context of community building and getting people together, it can be really valuable. It can. And so, no, yeah, it's really about building communities of solidarity, or a lot of it is about building communities of solidarity, about organization building. So yeah, no, I think that you don't have to be dispositionally confrontational. It helps because sometimes doing the right thing is a hard thing, but no, I don't think that's the case. I think that that probably is helpful if you want to do acts of direct defiance and street politics and organize protests and stuff like that. But I don't think that that's really necessary to do broader anarchist organizing. know Forrest Valkai is on the line. People keep telling me that I should be talking with him. I just don't know how I'd really get a hold of him, to be honest. Sam918 donated $5 and said, also, LSC doesn't exist. It was dissolved by National. Anyone pretending it's a thing is not being honest. Source, I was a member till 4 years ago. I don't know anything about that, so I can't really weigh in. I don't know when you say it was dissolved by National, I don't know what you mean by that. Like, did they literally just be like, we're abolishing the LSC? Like, what happened with that? I don't get it. Maymar says, hey, Anark, what do you think of the Frankfurt School? I think they had a lot of good social critique, but I do think that they kind of convinced us of a harmful idea. So, like, the classic conception in leftism was that culture is downstream from politics. That is to say that politics form the structure of society, and then the structure of society creates culture. That culture is really an outcome of the structure of power. And the Frankfurt School posited the idea that politics is downstream from culture, that the culture of a society transcends its political power structures, and that political power structures are determined by the content of their culture. And so what this led to was not just one generation, I'd say many generations of leftists more generally, starting to take on what I guess you would call like the cultural turn. And that is that they started thinking that what needed to be done was transforming public perception, creating more art, infiltrating institutions and changing their norms and their perspectives. And that this was a better way to approach social transformation than the transformation of political power, the construction of political power. And I think this was a massive failure. I think this was, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying there weren't good aspects of it. I do think there was some value to that. And I'm not saying as well that art and culture and developing those things doesn't have an effect. I just think that this idea that it's like linear, like one then the other, is false. So like the idea that culture is downstream from politics and then them flipping it, that politics is downstream from culture, both are wrong in my opinion. They're both co-determining. So like they both just determine each other and you have to develop both simultaneously. This is why what I talk about in my work, strategic holism. So this is like placing that in the context of this broader theoretical discussion. You know, I believe that strategic holism is important because you have to develop individual conceptions, you have to develop interpersonality, you have to develop social structures, and you have to develop environmental structures. You have to do that all at the same time. You don't just do one of those four things and then hope it's going to affect all the others. That's not how it works. So that's my critique of the Frankfurt School. Got $75 from Ceylon. I appreciate that so much. He says, hi, Anark. Can I get your thoughts about Andrewism's video on rethinking democracy? He argues that even popular assemblies would create permanent minorities, become impractical as they scale up, and eventually produce social disharmony. Yeah, me and Andrewism have a pretty serious split on this topic of the concept of democracy and formalization of decision-making. This split goes now a few years back. I think that it started with his video, Organizing Anarchy. That video was the first video I watched by Andrew where I had a pretty distinct disagreement with him. And we actually kind of hashed a lot of it out in DMs, but it was not a super productive discussion. And I don't think that he ever really understood the perspective I was attempting to convey to him. Or if he did understand it, it did not seem like he really produced what I found were satisfying responses to my critiques. And it was unfortunate because this kind of led to a split in our communities. There were a lot of people in my community who similarly had a critique of that video and really thought that what he was doing was presenting a sort of anti-organizationalist, informalist perspective of anarchism. And that the majority of people who are in my audience, or I shouldn't say the majority of the people who are really committed to my work and are part of my followers, these people all kind of have internalized a lot of the arguments I've made about why that doesn't work and why informalism doesn't work and why organizational structure is so important, why, formality is so important. And so there was a big argument, essentially. And unfortunately, I think that made zero impact on Andrew. He really did not concede to a single part of that, and instead, it seemed, in my perspective, it seems like he really just thought he was being misrepresented. However, every video he's made on the topic afterwards has really reinforced that I don't think he was really being misrepresented. I think that this informalist perspective is just that there are just many critiques to be made of it. And I understand, like, he is afraid of the rigidity of formal structures. He prefers kind of this fluid, shifting adhocracy, but I don't think that works. I think that, I'll just like analyzing these claims more directly. Popular assemblies could create permanent minorities. That's possible. Yeah, that's a possible negative outcome. And they would become impractical as they scale up. I disagree with this. I think that I do not think that this is a good argument, or rather, I think this is the argument, and this is not me trying to insult Andrew at all, but I think this argument is often the one that liberals or authoritarians would make, as to suppose that bottom-up forms of governance don't work. And I don't think that that's true. I do not think it's impractical as it scales up. It's only impractical if you do not structure it properly, and that they eventually will produce social disharmony. See, I think that one is flipped. I think that's what informality will do. Informality will create the social disharmony. It's when you bring people together and force them to hash things out together. It's when you create these bodies which are neutral places of discourse, where decisions are made together and implementation is hashed out together. That's how you reduce social disharmony. Social disharmony comes from atomization. It comes from people not understanding other people's perspectives. It comes from people backing out of discussions. It comes from people isolating themselves from the broader social fabric. And I think that insofar as you don't create these formal structures of dispute, that is the natural outcome of what will take place. The natural outcome of what will take place is that people will silo themselves off. This sort of ad hoc construction of networks is just going to fall apart, and it is going to devolve into a do-ocracy, which is to say the people who are doing the work will simply gain a position of informal hierarchy as they do the work over and over and over. And those who aren't doing the work will take for granted that those people who have taken on the work are just going to continue doing it indefinitely. And that is just going to be reproduced, and it is going to exacerbate itself longer and longer as you do not have these formal structures for people to come together and to actually work out their disputes. So getting back to the popular assemblies creating permanent minorities, that's a risk, but that's why you build structural guarantees or structural mitigations against that. You don't fix the problem of permanent minorities by informalizing. This process of permanent minority is something that would occur in an informal structure as well, especially given what I just talked about duocracies. I think that what you would do and what would happen in an ad hoc structure where people just like come together, work on a task and dissipate, is that what you would get is the people who are working on the tasks would become a minority of society. And then what you would get is a sort of technocratic control structure where the people who continually come together to do those tasks are the ones that are making the decisions for everyone else. And because there's no formal structure by which anybody's needs can be mediated, then there's also no recourse. So for example, I'll use an example. Let's imagine somebody, managing the internet, okay? So like in Andrew's conception of a sort of ad hoc approach, what you would get is like a small group of committed experts who know about the internet would come together, and then they would begin to work on the internet. Okay. Well, let's say that process of working on the internet, that's something that's taking place, in these 3 municipalities. But I'm not near those municipalities. I live thousands of miles away. Well, I have no formal mechanism by which to intervene in anything that is decided by those people. Those experts essentially get to make decisions for me without me having any recourse whatsoever. And there's no structural way for me to interact with them. Whereas in a formal structure, those who are affected decide would be the major determining factor. So there would be a formal mechanism for me to say, hey, those decisions you're making about the administration of the internet, they don't work for me. And then I would actually have a mechanism, a formal mechanism by which to go about challenging the decisions that they had made, because they would be a working group that was formally delegated by a particular series of municipal councils or whatever those might be, or a popular assemblies. So then we could go to those popular assemblies, have a public discussion with people who are affected. And in that process, we could revoke delegation. We could adjust their mandate. There could be some formal process by which the people who are affected by their decisions can actually go and request recourse to those decisions. But in an informal structure where everything is an adhocracy and it's a do-ocracy, where everybody who just does things comes together and then they disappear, there's no actual accountability. There's no accountability. It's all social accountability. It would literally require me to just go like write an angry letter to them or send them an angry message or just like hope that they are charitable, kind people that care about my concern. And because there's no formal mechanism by which to actually hold them accountable, then I really can't hold them accountable. And we have to recognize that in that example I just gave of people administering the internet, that's like a pretty serious big thing, but it's benign compared to all of the big decisions that we might imagine could be made by these little ad hoc committees that just come together in these spaces of encounter and then somehow make decisions that affect everybody else, but nobody else has any ability to make decisions about that. And that the only solution is that if I want to make decisions about how to manage the internet, somehow now I have to join this ad hoc committee of people that I don't know and that I have no formal connections to, and that instead now I have to essentially be charismatic, outgoing, assertive enough to insert myself into a committee of people who came together through purely social conditions, not through structural conditions, and somehow request that these people that I don't know and that have no actual obligation to help me because they have developed this little ad hoc committee in this space of encounter, that I'm supposed to now somehow have to be able to force my needs onto these people and get them to listen to my concerns. But all of this is solved by formalization. All of this is solved by delegation and revocation of delegation and formalization of working groups and the development of confederations of assemblies. All of that just goes right out the window and is solved immediately. Every concern I just brought up is immediately solved by that structure. And so this idea, this kind of ad hoc thing where consensus, like we replaced the idea of democracy with free association, I think this is a category error. Free association is not an alternative to democracy. The idea that free association would be an alternative to democracy is to say every time we have a disagreement, we disassociate. And I find that deeply antisocial. I find that deeply impractical. That cannot construct a society, in my opinion. That cannot construct large-scale coordination. Essentially, all of our large-scale structures would fall apart under those conditions, in my opinion. And what you would get is you would get increasing balkanization. You would get, because anybody who is like organized knows people have disputes and disagreements all the time. And that even minor, silly disputes can blow up into like big things that make people leave organizations. And the only way that really wouldn't happen is if there was a default structure where we were all coming together, where all of these decisions were made in a sort of public assembly, where it's like, okay, well, you may not like Joe and you and Joe don't get along, but you and Joe both belong to the same assembly. And if you want to make decisions together, you're going to have to come to the assembly and together you and Joe are going to make decisions. Whereas if it's just this ad hoc thing and Joe manages the municipal sewage and I disagree with Joe, well, now I've essentially been deprived of the ability to make any decisions about how the sewage in my entire society in my region or whatever is carried out. And I just don't think any of this is practical, and I don't think it's desirable. I don't think it expands the freedom of individuals. I think that what it does is it favors people who would be very charismatic, probably a lot of people who are very manipulative, and a lot of people who are very have a lot of technical expertise. And that in that occasion, essentially what you would get is a duocracy, which would produce a hierarchy, an informal hierarchy of those people who are manipulative, charismatic, or have technocratic expertise, and that there would be no checks on that process. So that's my perspective. Hypnosis says, I really wish you guys could have a conversation about this in person. Yeah, I'd be down for that, but I should just note we've had this conversation already in DMs, and it seems like everything I just said, I said to him, and he just, I don't know, he just did not provide me any real substantive rebuttals. He seemed to just say that I was like misrepresenting him, and every time that I asked for clarification, I feel like he clarified, but all he did was just repeat what I already had addressed. And so I guess we're at an impasse. That being said, I don't dislike Andrew. I like Andrew. I think he has a good heart. He has good intentions. He's read a lot. He's very theoretically informed. He's doing good things in spreading an anarchist vision to lots of other people. I have full confidence in his good faith. And I like him as a person. I think he's very personable. I think he's a cool guy. If me and him knew each other in real life, we'd absolutely get along. I just have a very strong theoretical disagreement with him on this subject. Yeah, Hypnosis says, sure, but text isn't great for those kinds of contentious conversations. Yeah, that's probably true. Super DBZ Killer says, if you had to concede any point to anti-organizationalist or individualist arguments, what would those points be? Do you see anything worthwhile in terms of areas worth integrating into your understanding of anarchism? Absolutely. That one's easy for me. And that is individualists or anti-organizationalists are right to say that formal organizational structures often develop a kind of inertia against action. They develop the idea that they're like, we're preparing, and then they don't want to act because they don't want to put themselves in a precarious position. And so they become averse to aggressive or risky action. I don't think that that's inevitable as per the formal structures themselves, but I do agree with anti-organizationalists that is a recurring tendency of formal structures, and that you can find plenty of examples in history, and I've seen the examples myself firsthand. So I do indeed think that is a fair critique. Long Defiant says, read Governing the Commons by Ostrom. Super informative about establishing basic structures to manage society. Yeah, I think that piece really demonstrates the necessity of formal structures. Like, it really just basically lays out that the commons cannot exist without persistent formal structures. Well, it looks like I've caught up to the chat. How about that? Okay, I'm going to scroll back up and see what I missed then. Crux says I should make that a clip. No, I don't want to create an adversarial relationship with Andrew. I don't have an adversarial feeling with Andrew. I just disagree with him on the topic, and I don't want to make it a clip because then it makes it seem like I'm just trying to, like, you know, stir up some kind of drama or something. I don't. I have no desire to stir up a drama. I feel sad that there was a split in our communities, to be honest. I would prefer to be Andrew's friend. I don't want him to be my enemy. Oh, damn. I missed donations in the meantime. Holy shit. Okay. Sorry, y'all. I got a $5 donation from Sunny Bun One. They said, love the streams. You guys reading Full Spectrum Resistance is really helping me get through the book. I'm glad to hear it. We've put volume 2 on a hiatus for now because we've had like low attendance in the reading group, but the Cooperation Tulsa is having a discussion about how we're going to try to reinvigorate that and then maybe restart volume 2. So I'm glad to hear that. It's possible we'll be opening it up to the public. Got a $10 donation from Melkor. Melkor says, my hope is that if we do have a successful anarchist revolution, Anark will do daily streams. Daily streams, that's crazy. Yeah, I mean, damn. I certainly could use the money. Like that's one part. And I don't mind doing these streams. It's getting easier to do longer and longer streams, but I don't know how I would fit this into my every single day. I'm open to doing them more often. I think that it sucks because the channel is like essentially plateauing right now, and I'm gonna be forced to figure out some way to like bring in viewership on the channel or to get interest or something. And I feel like the least coercive way of doing that is to stream more often. I just don't want this channel to just become a live streaming channel. Like that would really bother me if that's what this all became. That was one of my explicit desires when I first started this channel, was that I do not want to become a live streamer. I do not want to just clip farm my own live stream. I really want to make substantive videos about theory and praxis. Crux says, have you ever considered a dopamine fast or anything similar, perhaps without cutting out the healthy stuff like exercise, decent brain reset method for X dysfunction, shrooms perhaps? I mean, I've definitely used hallucinogens many times, but a dopamine fast, I guess that would just be like not looking at my phone anymore. Like, I don't know. I mean, yeah, I guess that'd be good. I do that naturally, I think. I don't even do it. It's not like a thing I decide like arbitrarily I'm going to do a dopamine fast. I'm just always trying to like correct my dopamine dysregulation. It's just something that's an ongoing feature of my life. NLH says, Anark, would you ever debate a liberal streamer? Yeah, if they engage in good faith. If I feel like they would actually listen and discuss with me and not try to turn it into a spectacle, absolutely. Melkor says Anark should start doing IRL streams. Yeah, maybe on Saturdays I could do a GoPro and y'all could just join me out at Flat Rock. Crux says, yeah, or junk food, literally nothing isn't actively healthy or productive. Yeah, I mean, I'm doing that right now. No junk food is kind of my current approach. I'm doing like keto as a reset. I'll go back to eating carbs. Like right now, I guess I'm kind of doing a mini cut. Like I've been building muscle and now I'm cutting. So I'm doing a mini cut just to get my dopamine back in order, my inflammation back down, because I started eating enough carbs in order to build muscle, and I just got fucking so dysregulated. Like I started getting emotionally dysregulated and inflammation and executive dysfunction. I started falling behind on all of my tasks, and yeah, no, so I'm just gonna keto for a little while, or like kind of mostly keto for a little while, just to re-regulate my dopamine. Knowledge and Defense says, during a revolution, do you think ANCAPs will sooner attempt a united front with us or with the fascists? With the fascists. I think that for me is like history just shows that indisputably. Mostly because we wouldn't accept them even if they wanted to. We wouldn't have a united front with the ANCAPs. Masuda Trent donated $20. He said, are you planning on dual streaming on Twitch? And have you considered putting up a live playlist of your videos like Anark TV? Oh, shit. I totally forgot about that. I do want to put up a live playlist of my videos like Anark TV. I should just have like a live stream that is perpetually going on this channel. And that's something me and you discussed when I met you in New York. And I need to get on that. I need somebody who's going to really get on that and help me with it. I think I might talk with my production assistant and see if we can get that started, because that's a great idea. I do have a friend as well who has a server, so that might be good. T-Plank donated $5 and said, to be honest, I appreciate you both greatly. I'm glad. I want you all to watch me and Andrew. This is certainly not me trying to create some kind of rivalry. I don't feel that way. And I just want to be clear that I like Andrew and I'm glad he's making his content. I just, once again, I just disagree on that topic. Jessica says, oh, where is it? Oh no, I'm still on stream. Sorry, I can't see the comments right now, but basically Jessica said it's important to connect anarchism with popular culture. And yeah, I've been thinking about making videos that are media analysis. I'd love to do a media analysis of Andor, but God, Disney is so litigious and is so aggressive with their takedowns. And I just don't know how I would avoid their aggression in doing takedowns. Voltarine Kropotkin says, hypothetically, if we ever achieve a democratic anarchist society, could you see yourself finding Andrewism's adhocracy anarchism more appealing? I just don't even think it would be necessary if we had a formal anarchist society. I just don't see why we would need it. I mean, I think that it would occur in a variety of circumstances, though, just for things, I suppose, that we are... that aren't being handled by the assemblies, or things that just like that it's not appropriate for a formal structure to handle. But I don't think that it would ever rise to a major factor in society. Melkor said the ideal might be 50% slop, 50% education for your channel. I hate that that's true. I hate that that's true, but it seems true. I just don't know what else I can do. I mean, I want the channel to survive, and I mean, that means that I just have to keep making content, and I have to make the content that people click. Ceylon 1999 donated another $25. They said, what are your thoughts on currency in an anarchist society? I saw it argued that we would need some form of it, but I prefer a library economy as the foundation of the economy. I think that currency will persist in the transition, like in the period that we are transitioning from here to there. Currency just will exist, because when you quantify the exchange value of a product, you will then just begin to circulate currency within your society, because you will then begin to do trade with external entities that have currency. That means that then internally people will begin to stockpile currency in order to buy goods from the external world. And then ultimately then that will commodify your economy in a sense. So I advocate what I would call a protective belt of the market, where it's just luxuries and the internal structure of needs is fulfilled entirely by use value. Flinder says, how do you develop a counterculture? I live in the Jim Crow area of Canada, and it's filled to the brim with illiterates pushing fascism. I think the only way you develop a counterculture is through art. I think that is really what it comes down to. You have to produce really fucking badass art, whether that's fiction, whether that's comics, whether that's music. Maybe it could be done through like house parties or something, but it basically has to be done through creating a bunch of art and creative content that is offered to people in your area that pushes a countercultural perspective does not assimilate to dominant conceptions. And it has to be good creative material. So what you'd have to find all of your creatives, you'd find the artists, you'd find all those sort of renegade figures in your community. You'd bring them together as best as possible and begin like hosting shows or house parties or whatever. But, you have to create both. You have to find the people that are making that art, and you have to find spaces for them to collaborate. Another person mentioned that you could triple stream across YouTube, Twitch, and TikTok. What are your thoughts? I could already be dual streaming on YouTube and Twitch. I just forgot to set up the service that would automatically do so. That's on me. Melkor says, debating would be awful, but also the best way to grow a channel. I know. And the worst part is I'd be really good at it. I'm a really good debater. It's a very perverse incentive. It's just not good. Dude Ryan says, this reminds me, you've said in the past that rural areas of anarchist Catalonia achieved decommodification. Could you give a brief elaboration on this, please? Yeah, no, literally, they decommodified enormous parts of the areas that they claimed. So let me get this brought up here. I'll just read you because the upcoming response video to Socialism for All and Bad Empanada includes some passages. I'm just going to read some of these passages. Or at least read one of these passages here. Okay. So this is a description of one of the cities in Aragon province in Spain during the time that anarchists had collectivized the region. And quote, money is abolished and has been replaced by vouchers. Food, meat, and all other provisions are distributed in quantity when plentiful or equitably rationed when in short supply. The collective allows 5 liters of wine per person weekly. Medical care and medicines are free. Even postage stamps are free. There is no rent. Housing, building repairs, water, gas, electricity, all are supplied gratis, not only to the collectivists, but also to the individualists, and that's the people who didn't opt into the collectives. The village generates its own power from a waterfall. There is no scarcity of clothing. By arrangement with the Barcelona textile plant, oil is exchanged for cloth, dresses, etc. Garments are distributed in rotation to 40 persons daily. So let's see here. Find another passage. There's a second passage in here. Where is it? Why can't I find it? Yeah, I'm trying to find this other quote that's in here. Yeah, here we go. Here's another one. In less than 3 years, the libertarian collectives did away with the wage system. Where this was not possible because of the sabotage of the Republican government, the bourgeoisie and their socialist and communist allies, they equalized income to the greatest possible extent. This was true of most of the socialized urban enterprises. The revolution instituted the family wage, under which commodities were distributed and services rendered not according to the amount of labor performed, but according to the number and needs of the family members. Similar arrangements were made for individuals living alone. So that was the condition condition of commodity production in the urban areas. And what I said earlier, that was the condition of the rural countrysides. So like, that's what I mean when I'm talking about, you know, that they'd had like full decommodification in the countrysides. Pretty incredible stuff. Like, it still remains to me like the most impressive example of socialist and communist implementation in history. Super DBZ Keller says, oh shit, do you have an ETA on when those response videos are coming? Probably next Friday. Not this Friday. It was supposed to come out this Friday, but then I had a power outage last night. Milton says, at this point, you need to just have a second channel where you post daily and the main channel where you have video essays. Bad Empanada does the same thing. I know. That's kind of where I'm at. I'm already kind of on that. So I will, give me just a sec. Okay. So I made a second channel. It's called Anark Slop. That's what it's called for now. Everybody who's here in the chat, please go over and subscribe to this second channel. This is probably a channel where I'll start posting like clips and stuff like that. And like hopefully that will, you know, eventually I'm just going to start posting all the stream clips there instead of on my main channel. Rin K says, some people believe that participating in subcultures is simply lifestylist and a waste of time, even if the culture can act as entryism for anarchism. Yeah, I disagree. I mean, or if it is lifestylism, it's productive lifestylism. I think it's... Frosty says, but why call it slop? Like, yeah, it's slop, but you don't need to call it that. I probably won't keep that name. It's just what it's called for now. Yeah, no, but I think that participating in subcultures isn't a bad thing. It should just not be the entirety of people's praxis. Rin Kai says, they will argue these people only like the aesthetic there for any subculture is a waste of time participating, but I'd argue that participating both in organization and culture is required as all avenues available and these art movements can act as a catalyst. Do you think this is a fundamental issue with Bookchin's critique being too overly general? No, I think Bookchin wasn't arguing against that. Bookchin was arguing against only that. Like and if you read Lifestyle Anarchism, he's not saying that he disagrees with people engaging in, you know, forms of personal rebellion and altering their lifestyles and engaging in subcultures. He's not saying that. He's just saying that that has replaced the development of mass movements. Like that's the entire argument. It's that lifestyleism is the only focus on the lifestyle elements. It is only the focus on playing music. It is the focus on, you know, practicing fucking subcultural anti-hegemonic yoga or whatever. You know, it's not that you do that. It's that you only do that. It should be called Anark Appetizers. Damn. Nice. Damn, well, that works. It's all the way up to 35 subscribers. Yeah, I mean, I want to reiterate again that, you know, if y'all want to help this grow, please go over to that and subscribe to it. Hypnosis says, but old man shakes fist at cloud is all Bookchin could possibly be. Yeah, that's how they how they like to present it, isn't it? Anark Appetizers, that's pretty good. NLH says Anark versus all of his Twitter haters. Yeah, basically. Damn. Yeah, I don't know what I'm ultimately going to name it. Right now it's so small, I don't think it matters. But I will say Anark slop does kind of characterize it badly, because not everything I'm posting on there is actually slop. You know, a lot of these stream clips are actually good. I'm happy with the commentary. I don't think they're slop, but I will say that they're low effort. That's for sure. So I don't want the channel to just become low effort. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. It keeps switching me back automatically to top chat, and that's so annoying. Buy Linux says, for €5, any tips for organizing rural middle-class areas? I'm thinking about giving my homegrown food in the community and seeing how people respond to it. Personally, one thing that we've theorized a lot in Cooperation Tulsa is that we think that developing like networks of backyard gardens is a great way to go in like suburban areas. Oh, you said rural areas. Yeah, I mean, rural areas, they have a lot of land. Develop like garden networks and stuff. That's probably a great place to start. Like food sovereignty is a great thing to do. Somebody said, no, keep the name. It's funny. Yeah, the name is kind of funny. What I need to do is I need to set this channel to have a release every single day. And just like put the entire backlog in here. NLH says we could go the ML route and make a ton of short form content with a ton of misinformation. Yeah, that absolutely would be the ML route, wouldn't it? Yeah, MLs do a misinformation blitzkrieg on social media. Yes, they do. Anarcho-slopism. Re-releasing content is a common strategy nowadays. Oh yeah, I'm thinking about re-recording a modern anarchism and re-recording the state is counter-revolutionary. NLH says, in all seriousness, what strategy should anarchists use for making content or propaganda online? I think, sadly, it's what we've just discussed. Probably live streaming and then just doing a ton of clip farming. And then getting a bunch of other people to make channels where you also clip farm those streams and just have like fucking 10 or 20 channels that all they do is like repost clips from the main channel. Zoltar says, maybe release all the essays as one mega essay. I'm going to do that with the State is Counter-Revolutionary and with a modern anarchism. Super DBZ Keller says, my thought is just being normal and doing normal stuff like gaming, media events, etc. I do think that that's also a very viable strategy. Zoltar says, no, all of your essays. That's crazy. That is huge. I guess it's not like infeasible, but it's crazy. Being a content creator sounds miserable. I mean, it's still the best job I've ever had, but it is a job and it does suck how it kind of forces you to just do like all this stuff, because, you know, when I got into this, it was very much like I wanted this to be a way for me just to spread radical consciousness and all of that. But now it sucks because now it's like actually my income. And so now I'm stuck in this situation where I just have to like find some way to make ends meet doing it as well. Fabulator says, if you had to choose between an ML revolution and capitalism, what would you choose? I mean, not to be obtuse, but they're the same thing. ML revolutions only create capitalism. ML revolutions have never created anything but capitalism. So ML revolutions only make sense in a nation that has not yet achieved capitalism. I'd be interested if anybody could point me to an example of an ML revolution that took place in a society that was already capitalist. They pretty much don't exist. As far as I can see, ML revolutions only take place under conditions where they're under like dictatorship or colonialism. And they never take place under a society that is a liberal democracy. Because all they end up at is liberal democracy. So nobody's going to fight a revolution to achieve another liberal democracy. And I'm not saying it is literally a liberal democracy, but it isn't, because basically a social democracy. Flinner says, I recall you saying in a previous stream that you could see Trump dying or another big event leading to a new deal. Do you really think that? There's no strong labor movement that has leverage. Yeah, I suppose, I mean, I would have to know exactly what I said in that stream because I'm not sure. I don't know if I phrased it precisely the way you're saying, but I do think Trump dying will weaken the right wing. I think that it would be the high watermark of the MAGA movement if Trump died, and that would be it. Then the pendulum would begin swinging back. Would it lead to the New Deal? Only if like social democrats ended up in very prominent positions. Oh, there's the kitty. There's the kitty, baby. Hello, sweetie. Hello. Little baby. Little baby. Hi, Lorenzo, sweetie. Hello. You want cuddle? Come here. Yeah, come here, baby. Come here, sweetie. What you doing? Come over here. Come here. Come here, sweetie. Yeah. Yeah. Come here. Come here. Oh, you're so cute. You baby. You sweet baby. Sweet baby. Yeah. Oh, you're so cute. Sorry, you're going to have to listen to me all the way over here, everyone. Aw, baby. He's so sweet. He's such a sweet darling. I don't know if y'all can hear me at all right now, but also I don't care because I'm just going to cuddle with the kitty. He's so cute. This cat's name is Lorenzo. Little baby. Lorenzo's so sweet. He just likes to cuddle. He loves to cuddle. Did I name him after a historical Lorenzo? Yes, I named him after Lorenzo Camboa Irvin. Yes, that's who I named him after, Lorenzo Camboa Irvin. That's correct. So NLH says, I find it hard to transform already existing influencers into anarchists. Me and Psycho tried with one and it was unsuccessful. Social media incentivizes making content on what's already popular. Yeah, I would add that it's more than just making about what's already popular, but like after you've been making content for a while, you sort of have a brand. So like people expect you to like argue for a particular position. And when you don't argue for that position, you start to like, you'll like lose subscribers and stuff, right? So you kind of get stuck into a niche and it's very difficult to not be in that niche. Like for example, on this channel, I would really like to do stuff that's more broadly about art and philosophy. And I feel like if I did, this channel might see a decline because people aren't here for that. I mean, I think that some people would be here for that, but I do think that a lot of people would be like, well, this isn't what I signed up for, you know, like, I think that's very possible. And that is a problem that a lot of creators have talked about, is like the inability to just do like smooth transitions to different content forms. Yeah, audience capture, exactly. Not dumb, man. That's exactly right. Audience capture. It's not even like, it becomes just hard to flex. It becomes very difficult to like pivot to something else. And, you know, I love this channel and I'm super down to continue talking about anarchism and political theory. And, you know, I'm a revolutionary. I'm a committed revolutionary. So this channel, I have no desire to stop doing this channel, but I would like if this channel could also, you know, be about other things. And that's why I tried to do a video on Stoicism and I tried to do a video on the Epstein stuff. And like, you know, I care about all kinds of stuff and I'd like to talk about all kinds of stuff. And I'm going to see. Well, I'm glad you liked the video about absurdist existentialism and stoicism, because that was part of why I was doing that. I was like, I wonder if I can do a little more philosophy on this channel. And those videos did okay. So maybe I should take that as an indication that, yes, I can. They didn't do great, but they did okay. So I might continue to do that. T-Plant gave $2. Treats for Lorenzo, he said. Aw, treats for Lorenzo. Yeah, the philosophy videos did decent. That's good. I think I should probably keep that in mind. You know, I have an entire philosophy I've never talked about on the channel. You know, I have an entire philosophical framework that I've never discussed. That's cool. I'm glad people are telling me they liked some of those videos I did. I'm glad to hear that. Crux says, favorite perspective technologies, fusion power, lab-grown meat, solid-state batteries, solar, other niche stuff. I am pretty hyped about like the most cutting-edge solar panel technologies. Those are pretty great. But I'm not like super up to date on it. It's been a long time since I've really super kept up with that stuff. People are asking about the philosophical framework. So like, I have a philosophical perspective on like all of the major fields of philosophy, you know, epistemology, logic, ethics, ontology, all that stuff. I have perspectives on all of those. And in fact, right after I got out of college, I wrote a philosophy book where I essentially laid out my positions at that point when I had just gotten out of college. And, you know, I've had significant different changes in my perspective since then, but I've thought about going back and using that philosophy book as the foundation for a series of videos on the channel. And I wonder if people would be interested in that, because I think right now people are really like burned out by politics. They don't want to hear about politics right now, but they might be down for hearing about philosophy. So I think I might be down to start doing that. Black Anarchist says, speaking of Stoicism, are you familiar with Ryan Holiday? Yeah, absolutely. And somebody says Stoicism sounds very conservative. I did a video on Stoicism where I talk, Ryan Holiday is mentioned at the end, and it's essentially an argument against the idea that Stoicism is conservative. So. A long essay on general philosophy would be awesome. Yeah, it's basically what it is. It's basically just giving my perspectives on philosophy and like where I am as what my philosophy is, essentially. Rin K says, I think we could look at it. Wait. I think we can look at it dialectically. When people propose lifestyleism by itself is the problem. Rather, it's problematic to not use all methods. Yeah, that's Bookchin's argument. That's what Bookchin says. NLH says, Anark, what do you think of TAZs, these temporary autonomous zones? I think you know exactly what I think about those, but I'll just reiterate my position. And that is, I think they're great insofar as that they are protests, but I think that insofar as they're going to become something more than the just temporary little spot, that they need to develop formal structure. And it just seems like that's so rare in these places. It seems like they don't want to develop formal structure. But I bet if they began developing structure, we would find that they would be a lot more revolutionary and they would last a lot longer as well, if I had to guess. Yeah, they're useful in the same way affinity groups are useful. They're more radical, I suppose, than most affinity groups, but I think that they're the way they get built is they're not built to last, and for me, that's not enough. AJ Prince says, I think Ryan Holiday has some pretty regressive views on his interpretation of Stoicism. Would love to get into it where I think he gets it wrong. Interesting. I haven't got that sense from him. It seems to me like Ryan Holiday came into Stoicism being more conservative, and then as he read more about Stoicism, actually became a little more progressive. At least that's the kind of the narrative that I'm getting from him. It seems like he really took seriously what the pillar of justice meant in Stoicism, and it made him realize that Stoicism could not be conservative. And it's kind of interesting that he had that arc. Got a donation of $10 from Mercantoine, I think, and Merch Antoine, maybe. For my favorite YouTube channel and a treat for the cat. Us Lorenzo's got to look out for each other. We're rare breeds. Nice. Got a Lorenzo giving the Lorenzo a treat. Lorenzo's basking in the sun right now. Ascari Lone Wolf says, as far as video types you make, can we get more liberation and action videos? I think that's what they were called. Those are super inspiring. Damn, yeah, I guess I need to get back on that. I gotta be honest, like that kind of like journalistic orientation is not very fun for me, but I understand how important it is. So I'll probably get back on it soon. Fabulator says, have you read the book Anarchism or Socialism by Stalin? It argues against anarchism, but funny enough, that's what got me considering anarchism. I haven't read it, I don't think. There was a period of time where I was just reading all of the Marxist polemics against anarchism, and I don't remember if that was one of them. But I might do kind of what I've done in the past, where I just like do a response video to it, where I just like read it. How long is it? This is so short. This isn't even an essay. This is a series of super short essays. This isn't even like, Why do people even reference this? This is so short. It seems like a monkey's understanding of how to argue against anarchism. Well, it'd be an easy video. T-Plank has been a member for 12 months. Said Anark philosophy dump for the win. Well, we shall see. Masuda Trent donated $5. He said, if you make new Liberation in Action, the videos don't have to be perfect. They just need to exist since there's not a lot of examples on YouTube. Yeah, I mean, you're right. That's true. Absolutely true. So my goal with these live streams is I want each one to be longer than the last for a while because I feel like I need to get up my times. So let's see, your last one was 2 hours, 45 plus 47. So we're looking at about 3.5 hours. So right now, let's see, I'm coming up on 2.5. So I got about another hour before I get to where the other one was. I'm going to use the restroom real quick. I have returned donation from Sam for $5. He said, actively working on Liberation in Action research for Daniel, for your information. Yeah, that's exactly right. Honestly, one of the next video I'd love to do for Liberation in Action is the C&T FAI in the Spanish Civil War. That's what I would love to do. But that is also just insane how big the scale of that is, you know, how big that actually could be and how much work I could put into that. Cause I would really love to just do an excellent quality video, a video that is just astounding detail and that really like calls upon all of the previous resources that have been made. And that is a lot of effort and a very high burden. Oh, there's the Murray baby. Hi, Murray baby. There's my Murray sweetie. Oh, baby. No, baby. No pause on the keyboard. No pause on the keyboard. No pause on the keyboard. No, no. Can you all see his little paw? Adorable. No, stop. So cute. Murray, no pause on the keyboard. He is being a brat right now. Let Lorenzo type their manifesto. It'd be cute if he wanted to do that, but I don't think he does. That's Murray, by the way, not Lorenzo. Murray is gray and Lorenzo is a tuxedo kitty. What do I know about the Shinmin Korean anarchists? Not enough. Not enough, that's for sure. Oops, my bad. I got distracted by a customer. Tell Murray I apologize. I'm glad you apologized. He was really upset by it. He told me he was upset. Somebody, Victoria's Gardenasaurus says, I would love some ASMR planting or seed starting videos at Flat Rock. I really do think that we can do something like that, like for those work days. I'm just trying to figure out what the workflow is for me to film those. And I haven't quite figured out what it looks like to film those. Because if all I do is just film them on my phone, well, then that requires me to be filming instead of working. If somebody else films them, that requires them to be filming and not working. Also, anything that I film, it seems like it tends towards something I'd want to do to promote Cooperation Tulsa on our social media rather than on my channel. And I'm trying to figure out what the balance of that is. Get a tripod and do time lapses and then overdub it. That's probably the right way to go. I could bring the camera out and then just sit it on a tripod, aim it at what we're doing. People could see. That probably is correct, to be honest. Does Cooperation Tulsa have a channel? Yeah, Cooperation Tulsa does have a channel. Let me bring that up for you real quick. There it is. There's a link. All right. Anyway. So, yeah. Just catching anybody up who wasn't here earlier in the stream, but I am basically done with the response video to Socialism for All and Bad Empanada. I'm pretty happy with the video, but it is long. It's like 2 hours and 10 minutes long. But I do think that it is a substantive rebuttal to what they said. I don't think that after anybody watches that, I do not think that people are going to think that Socialism for All and Bad Empanada provided strong arguments. I think Socialism for All, I respected his quite a bit more. Bad Empanadas was garbage, but people kept asking for me to respond specifically to his, probably because he has a bunch of weird like hangers on in his audience who are just like obsessed with him in the most like unhealthy way. But yeah, so that video is basically complete. I probably will just upload it this coming Friday. It could definitely use just like finishing touches and polish, but it's basically done. I'm going to keep working on the video essays that I've had brewing for a very long time. I should probably just finish the one on fascism. It's just that I don't have much motivation right now. I'm having a hard time motivating myself. Like the video essay topics that I've chosen, I think that they're really important, but I'm having a hard time self-motivating. And that probably means that I'm just like missing some key theoretical piece that would draw it all together and make me interested. So T-Plink donates $2 treats for Murray. See, Murray, okay, so Lorenzo, giving treats to Lorenzo is harder because Lorenzo is like affection motivated. Lorenzo wants cuddles and pets. Murray loves treats. Bro would love if I gave him some cromches right now. Yeah, so I might be able to give him some treats. Booty Broth says, what is exactly you're responding to? So I posted a stream clip a while back basically talking about Marxism-Leninism doesn't work and they're just lying to you about its effectiveness. And I like cited this like a back of the envelope calculation of like the failure rate of Marxist-Leninists. And like fucking 4 different channels made responses to the video, but the only ones that seemed like it was worth responding, Socialism for All made a video where he actually at least laid out some theoretical critiques, and the Bad Empanada made some garbage slop content, which everybody wanted me to respond to for some reason. So I just combined the 2 videos, and I'm doing a response to both of them at the same time. And so yeah, so that'll be coming out next Friday. Flinter says, why do you think MLs argue that anarchism is a petite bourgeois ideology? I'd argue that's more of an issue with the broader left and less common with anarchism than other leftist tendencies. Yeah, I would say it is less common with anarchism than other leftist tendencies, but I do think the reason is pretty clear to me, and that is that they're referring to Proudhon. Okay. So Proudhon, the critiques of Proudhon was that he wanted like a small manufacturer production. He didn't really talk much about like large scale coordination. So really what they're all doing is they're just reading Marx's critique of Proudhon, and then they're just kind of reproducing it over and over and over without any critical inspection of how anarchism has changed in the meantime. But I don't even think the critique of Proudhon was correct. Proudhon didn't really just want a bunch of petty bourgeois production. That's not the case. But Marx said he did in The Poverty of Philosophy. And since Marxists really only read The Poverty of Philosophy as a critique of anarchism, they seem to think that Marx's critique of Proudhon is an accurate critique of anarchism writ large. And so what we get is basically Marxists just repeating Marx's critique of Proudhon over and over and over and over and over and over. Now for, what is that? Not quite a century, almost a century. Renke says, I wasn't aware that Bookchin wanted a synthesis in between both types. It makes sense that people weaponize this critique out of context. Often organizationalists do so. I made this conclusion unaware that it was also his position, not having access to his material itself. That encourages me to at least read his work more so. This weaponized point was also used against me by platformists mostly. That's very weird. It's very weird. It's weird that platformists wouldn't just agree with Bookchin. It seems like they'd be on Bookchin's side, to be honest. Very odd that they would take that piece. I don't really understand how platformists would disagree with Bookchin on this topic, but maybe I'm just missing something. Maybe I'm not quite understanding what you're discussing. What's your favorite 1950s and 1980s anarchist philosopher? I mean, for me, this is just an easy layup, and that's Murray Bookchin. Just 1,000,000,000% Murray Bookchin. Murray Bookchin remains one of the most influential people on my perspective. Okay, chat has slowed down quite a bit here. So I'll start scrolling back up. Anark sweetie live stream so sweetie. I don't know. This is a person I know. Anyway, oh, the psychedelic question, Crux. Let me go back up then. Favorite ideas of things to do with psychedelics, especially for positive transformative intentions and stuff like that. I take safety seriously. Don't worry. Favorite activity settings, mindsets. Thank you. So honestly, I use psychedelics in a very therapeutic way. I rarely just use them for fun. They're pretty much always something that I'm doing as like a brain massage or as a way to get close to a person that I want to bond with. They're sometimes used as a form of decompression when I feel like I've been through a lot of difficult things. And for me personally, I get a lot out of solo tripping. I know a lot of people have really bad trips when they solo trip. I do not. I do not have bad trips. I pretty much always am like come to therapeutic conclusions. I pretty much always feel quite a bit better afterwards. I feel transformed. I feel confident. I feel recentered. And I think that's because I'm not afraid of my own mind. Like, I'm not afraid wherever my mind takes me. That's absolutely fine. And so because I'm not afraid of my own mind, I can happily trip alone and I can essentially guide my trip without any issues. And for me, it's pretty much always just like my goal during the trip is to determine where am I in life? Like, where am I in life? What do I need to be focusing on? What are my priorities? What am I not seeing? What is obscured to me? You know, like I want to think deeply and philosophically. I want to discover myself. And so I just go into it with a mindset of like an open exploration of myself and a willingness to kind of like criticize my fears and apprehensions and to resituate myself in a difficult world. And so, yeah, that's my perspective. I don't use them very much as like a source for like quote unquote fun. I use them as a source for sort of spiritual self-discovery, I guess you would say. And that's just me. Okay. You said same. That's the nature of my question, not just for fun. Yeah, I think for me, it's, somebody said Anark trip stream when, honestly, I think I'd be down for that. I think I really would. I think I'd be down for that. Not this stream, but in the future, I think I might be down for that. Crux says, so what kind of setting would you set up for a real good one, do you think? We use them for similar reason. My set is always home, is always at home. If it's a solo trip, I don't want to be out and about. I don't want to be where people can like observe me and judge me. I want to be in my own element. I want to be somewhere that I feel comfortable and somewhere where I feel, at home. And my setting is always brave self-inspection. My setting is always don't fear whatever comes. It is the willingness to explore with a holistic intent whatever comes at me, non-attachment to outcomes, pure acceptance, recognition of impermanence. internalizing the locus of control. Somebody said, what would you take? Shrooms, LSD, DMT? LSD is my favorite, but it's hard to get. Flinner says, psychedelics scare me, to be honest. I think that if you are scared of psychedelics, I would say if you're not on the schizoaffective spectrum, that you don't need to be scared of psychedelics, but you should ask yourself, if you are scared of psychedelics, why you are scared of your own mind, because that's what you're going to really encounter when you take psychedelics. You are going to encounter the truth of your own psyche. And if you're afraid of your own mind, I think that you should probably not solo trip, to be fair. But I think you should also come into it with a recognition that you should be inspecting why you're afraid of your mind. Why are you afraid of your own psyche? That's a good question for you to untangle and to inspect during your trip, because I think that's really what it comes down to. It comes down to a fear of yourself. And part of the reason why I'm good at solo tripping is I'm not afraid of myself. I'm not afraid of my own mind. I'm very comfortably situated within my personhood. Dude Ryan makes a very good note. If you're on SSRIs, taking psychedelics can lead to serotonin syndrome. Be careful. Yes, do not take psychedelics if you're on SSRIs. Although some people have told me that if they're on SSRIs and they take psychedelics, it just does nothing. It does nothing. Okay. Like, that's what people have told me. They just don't even trip, which is crazy. It's crazy. I've never had that. I've never experienced it. By Furious says, I do actually take for fun sometimes too. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with taking them for fun. It's just not what I use them for. Crux says, I've heard they cancel somehow. Yeah, that's what I've heard. I've heard that they just like don't affect you. It's super interesting. Crumb Timber says, what does tripping do for you? Can you not gain the benefits you get from tripping through other means? Yes. But I would say you would get those same benefits. You would have to become basically a master at meditation to get those same benefits. And I'm not saying don't do that. Actually, I think that might be a great thing for you to spend your time on. But if you want a shortcut to the sort of revelations of tripping, if you want that, or if you want the shortcut to the revelations of meditation, you'll find that shortcut in hallucinogens, in psychedelics. So, I guess more in a concrete answer to your question though, what does tripping do for you? Studies have demonstrated that what's going on with psychedelics is they are decompartmentalizing your brain. So every day you go about your world with a bunch of base assumptions that are transfixed onto your environment. You have assumptions about what's going to happen, about how people will act and why they will act that way. You have these relational networks between concepts, and little do you know, those are utterly transformative in structuring your world. You do not recognize the degree to which those are determining your conscious mental function on a daily basis, your cognitive and emotional function. You do not recognize how much those are affecting you. When you take psychedelics, you break up all the compartments. You dissolve all of the networks, and you get to observe the elements fresh again. A lot of people explain that it's almost like being a child, because when you're a child, you haven't built all those compartments. You haven't built all of those referential networks. And so when you're a child, you know that feeling of non-judgment that you experience as a child? That feeling where you just are perceiving without judgment? I think that's a very good description of what you'll experience on psychedelics. Now, here's the thing. If you go into it and you're scared of losing your compartments, if you're scared of losing your referential networks, if you're terrified of the result of that process, then you will be mortified by the process. It will be horrifying for you. You will be terrified by the results. And I do think, however, unless you're on the schizoaffective spectrum, unless you're on SSRIs, I do think that will be a healthy process for you to experience at least once. Because that process is you experiencing your ego and all of the false conceptions of yourself being dissolved. And that may give you a new perspective, which you desperately need. And I think everybody needs to experience ego death at least once in their life. And so if you've never experienced that and you're not on SSRIs and you're not on the schizoaffective spectrum, I do think that almost every human being on earth would benefit from experiencing ego death. I think that it is very, very important. Now, if you want to go into it and not be terrified by that process of ego death, you need to be comfortable with who you are. You need to be comfortable in your own mind. And I think that process only comes about by being honest about your thoughts and by not running from your thoughts and not being afraid of your personhood. As somebody says, it's excellent for reprogramming your brain and releasing your biases. Masuda Trent says, disclaimer, do not trip on stream as it's against YouTube's terms of service. Understood. I'll keep that in mind. Flinner says, I don't know if I would say I'm afraid of my own mind. I'm just scared I'd have a bad trip and see a bunch of things. In my experience, bad trips come from fear. The more afraid you are, the more likely you'll have a bad trip. I know that's a twisted sort of contradiction. But you have to make peace with lack of control when you trip. You have to start with the assumption you don't control the trip. The trip is merely a thing that you are going to experience, and you need to be prepared for the visceral experience. And I think that if you practice acceptance at the very beginning, and you don't start from the assumption that you're going to have a bad trip, and instead what you do is you practice acceptance about whatever happens, in that process, you will more likely guarantee that you won't have a bad trip. That makes it less likely you'll have a bad trip. I do think that it might be a good idea if it's your first time to trip with somebody else and with somebody who is experienced. Yeah, somebody says also start with small doses. Don't ever jump to a heroic dose. Always start with a small dose. Fabulator says psychedelics are an enhancer of what you are already feeling. I think yeah. It's whatever you go in with, whatever your intentions are going in, very likely to be what you will experience. I will make a caveat that sometimes I will go into a psychedelic experience in really not a great place. And the experience itself is like a brain massage. It like works out the knots in my psyche. And I think that that's very valuable. It can help me reconnect with my personhood. It can help me reconnect with the core of my being. And sometimes it can kind of change my perspective. It can change my orientation as I go into it. By Furious says, if it's LSD, never take the second tab, no matter how long it takes to kick in. Yeah, just do not assume that your dose isn't working. It probably is working. Dude Ryan says, I've heard LSD is like choosing where you want the trip to go, whereas shrooms is like, hold on, you're going where I'm taking you. Is this true in your experience? I mean, not in my personal experience. In my personal experience, LSD is just a cleaner, more refined trip. The visual field is not as fuzzy and distorted. My brain feels sharper and more precise. Shrooms feel more like I'm entering a haze, like I'm going into a psychedelic mist almost. And it can be very comforting. It can be kind of a comforting feeling. But I don't feel like the shrooms take the steering wheel any more than LSD does in my experience. The only hallucinogen I've had that really felt like it took the steering wheel in a way that I didn't have really some control was mescaline. And I think that was just because it was so intense. Flinter says, what does experiencing ego death mean? So I kind of explained it earlier, but you go through your life with a bunch of preconceptions about who you are. So I would say, imagine who you were as like a child. Remember the feeling of going through the world without preconceptions and judgments. You went through the world and you simply experienced. It was like experience flowed through you, right? The experience went in and then you processed it. And then you moved forward. But the processing part didn't usually experience, you probably didn't experience a whole lot of suffering. You experienced it as just a visceral experience, you know, as a camera might experience an image entering it. You know, the camera doesn't have a judgment of the image that comes through it. Over the course of our lives, we develop perceptions of ourselves. We develop an understanding of who we think we are. We develop precepts that we believe that we need to function on. We develop expectations about how we deserve to be treated. We develop views, long views of how we want our lives to pan out. And we develop narratives about how our lives have been up until the point that we currently are. In a physical sense, in a physiological sense, this is our brain developing complex neural networks, right? Like it's our brain creating all of these strong structures of inference between ideas and expectations and memories. And in that experience, we develop a sense of personhood. It becomes a psychological structure of self, I guess is the best way to put it. And this may sound like, I don't know, very abstract. This may sound like something where you're like, what the fuck does that mean? Well, it's something that you really come into visceral contact with when you take a psychedelic. When you take a psychedelic, you become very aware of what everything I just said. Because what happens for the first time is it's almost like you return to a childlike orientation of recognizing, or I guess maybe I should say not expecting all of those things. Your expectations dissolve away. The narratives you've told about yourself, you see them now in a new light. It feels like now you're seeing yourself from the outside for the first time. Or more accurately, perhaps you're seeing yourself from an objective perspective for the first time. You're recognizing all of these things you thought about yourself, all of these things you thought about the world, all of those narratives about your past and your personhood and who you are and how you should be treated and all of those things. They sort of dissolve away. And it's interesting because that's actually exactly what studies show about what it does to the brain, hallucinogens' effects on the brain. it disrupts the connections between all of those networks. Let's see here. I'm looking for the specific study. Yeah, brain connectivity. So how does it do that? I think this is one of the most interesting things for me. How does it do it? Well, what it does is, okay, so the way neuron networks are established is like, imagine there's a path, right? You got like all these connections and there's a path from like here to here, okay? That becomes like a network. It becomes reinforced that these two get connected together, okay? And that is discernible by the fact that it's not from here to here. It's from here to here. I know this is really abstract. Well, what happens with psychedelics is it's like this gets connected with this and this and this and this, and this gets connected with this and this and this, and these all get connected together. And it's almost like every neuron in your brain begins talking with one another. It becomes this active process. Your brain is fully connected, robustly connected with every other part of your brain. And this experience, it breaks down all these arbitrary boundaries between all of your perceptions of self and all of your expectations. And that is an experience that breaks down your ego. Is all of that stuff I just described. Your personhood is all of that stuff I just described. It's all your experiences. It's your background. It's your memories. It's your future expectations. It's your feelings of deservedness. It's all of that stuff. All of that stuff. That's all about how those neuron networks are connected. And what studies show that psychedelics do is they essentially create this enormous cascading effect of all of these neuron networks no longer being separated off from one another in these little silos where this neuron network is disconnected from that neural network. All the networks begin robustly connecting. And in that process, all the boundaries get broken down. And in that process of all the boundaries get broken down, you discover I guess you might say either yourself and who you really are, or you discover that there is no self and that all you have is a series of arbitrary expectations and boundaries and desires. And this is what I mean by ego death. This is what I mean by ego death. Hope that's helpful. Yeah, so like what I just described about the default, that thing I described about how every day you have all of those connections between different parts of your brain, and the different parts of your brain are like connected and create your thoughts and expectations. This is called the default mode network. So the default mode network is kind of like what your brain defaults to as all of your neuron connections. Let's see here. I don't know. I mean, maybe I haven't described this correctly. It says that it's composed of the medial prefrontal cortex. Okay. It's essentially the network. The default mode network is what is activated in your personhood when you're not actively engaged in any particular task or thought. And I think what happens is that the default mode network gets dissolved. Let's see here. They disrupt and desynchronize the brain's default mode network. So like that default way you're approaching every single day, that network of how your brain functions every single day, about how it processes experience, it dissolves the default way that you experience. And what that does is it gives you a new perspective on your psyche. It's utterly transformative. So, yeah, as By Furious says, parts of your brain that are normally never communicate become connected. It feels like how I imagine that Buddhist enlightenment must feel. Yeah, precisely. In fact, people who meditate and get in a very, very deep meditation basically describe that it feels like a psychedelia, that it feels like a hallucinogen. Y'all can see Murray on the screen. Look how cute he is. He's so cute. How long did I just fucking talk about LSD? Damn. I feel like I just talked about LSD for like 30 minutes. Apparently, autistic people have a disrupted default mode network, according to that wiki page. I would not be shocked to find out that were the case. I think that would explain a lot about how it feels to be neurodivergent. Yeah, just to reinforce what I was saying here, the functional hubs of the default mode network, we're talking about ego once again, like, okay, so the posterior cingulate cortex combines bottom-up attention with information from memory and perception. That's what I was talking about, your memories about who you are. Medial prefrontal cortex is decisions about self-processing, such as your personal information, your autobiographical memories, future goals and events, and decision-making regarding those. So, once again, there's that your personhood. And then the last one is your angular gyrus, which it connects perception, attention, spatial cognition, and action that helps with the recall of episodic memories. So notice that this is all about memory. This is all about your establishment of self through what has taken place to you through your life. And that is what establishes this default mode network. Well, hallucinogens dissolve that default mode network. Should have worn the mushroom shirt this stream for sure. Yeah, Murray is chilling. Yeah, he is. He's chilling out. He's just a baby. E. Prieto says, this has got to be one of the most interesting conversations occurring on Earth right now. I appreciate that. I'm glad you think so. Yeah, I think that one thing that a lot of people who watch this stream don't really understand about me is just how many different things that I have spent my time on in my life. Like how many different areas of study that I engage in, you know, like I've spent entire eras of my life on things that have like nothing to do with this channel. And that's not to say that it's not important to me, but just, nothing to do with anarchism. And, I've spent entire eras of my life studying philosophy, studying science, experiencing, psychedelics, for example, being an artist and world building and being both a fiction and a nonfiction writer. And, I could talk about any of this shit. Like this channel could be about so many things. I just feel like, I experience audience capture to a degree because I know that everybody who watches me is here for anarchism, is here for libertarian socialism. They want to learn about those topics and they want to hear me expound upon them because they see me as somebody with some expertise and experience. And I am, but that's not, my life has been so many things. I spent a decade in college and universities getting an associate's in mathematics and a bachelor's in physics. I was one class away from having a double major in mathematics. So I almost had a physics mathematics double major, and I had a minor in philosophy. I've spent my life doing many, many different things. What kind of art did I make apart from the video? I was a visual artist when I was young. I loved drawing. I was a huge fan of drawing. I loved graphite, and I thought I wanted to be a comic book artist when I was young. That's what I thought I wanted to do when I was young. I wanted to draw comic books, and I got pretty good as a penciler. I was never like an excellent penciler, but I think that if I had really focused on it, I kept putting my mind towards it, I absolutely would have been excellent by this point. And that is what led me into creating fiction, because when I was illustrating and when I was doing penciling, I was always imagining the worlds that were behind these characters and who these characters were and what their histories were and so on and so on and so on. And that got me into writing fiction, and I realized I was a natural world builder very early on, like 15, 16 years old. And so I started writing fiction for the first time when I was 15. I wrote just this terrible novel, like I suppose everybody does when they first get started. And starting from about the age of 15, I wanted to be a fiction author. And that's still something that I want to be. I love writing fiction. I am very naturally a world builder. But also around that time, I was getting into philosophy, and I love philosophy. And shortly after, somewhere around maybe 18, 19 years old, I got into science. I got into physics. And so my whole life has been just combining a bunch of interests all at once. And this channel is that's part of the reason why earlier in the stream I was like, yeah, I wanted to branch out into philosophy, you know, because I'm just looking for a way to, I want this channel to not be a job as much as possible. I would love for this to just be a place where I can do my sort of own creative self-expression, but I also know that people aren't here for all that. Have I dabbled in music? No, that's one thing I never dabbled in, and the reason is just because it seemed like it was something that I had too much respect for. It was something I had so much respect for that I would only get into it if I felt like I could give it everything about myself. My parents were musicians, and a lot of my friends were musicians. My current partner is a musician. She's currently performing in Fort Smith, Arkansas. She'll be performing a series of gigs all weekend. She travels around. And I've been surrounded by musicians all my life, but I never delved into it, mostly because I just felt like I wanted to give it the respect it deserved, if that makes sense. But I've been thinking about trying anyway, because just fuck it, you know? But I also don't want to just get into music because my partner is into music, because then the motivation is a fickle motivation. I want the motivation to be of myself. And so, yeah. Why Tusara says, what do your parents think about your anarchism? My parents have, I have a good relationship with my mom and dad, mostly with my mom, but also with my dad. And, I've been very kind of obstinate and self-driven ever since I was young. So my parents got used to me being sort of this like very headstrong sort of person where I said what I thought and I did what I believed in ever since I was very young, even when I was making bad decisions. They realized they couldn't really force me to do anything I didn't want to do very early on in my life, probably my early teen years. And so my parents were very conflicted with some of my where I went with that. Like I deconverted from Christianity. That was what they were most upset about. But I think that it was good that I started that early, because then as my life progressed, my parents were more accepting of me just telling them where I was at. They were less judgmental. They were more just kind of like, yeah, of course Daniel's going to do that. That's who Daniel is. And so even though me and my dad sometimes clash, my mom has always been a very safe place for me to explore my ideas and to discuss things with her. And I'll say that explicitly the turn towards anarchism, my parents see it as an expression of my general desire to act in the real world. And they've been proud of me for acting the real world, for being a protester, for organizing, for creating organizations, for changing conditions in a real way. They're proud of me for being somebody who acts in the real world. And they see my anarchism as an expression of that impulse. And so because they see it as an expression of my impulse to act in the real world and do things that matter and make an impact, I think that even when they disagree with it, they're basically fully non-judgmental, because they recognize it must not be so bad because it motivates him to do these things that we like. You know, it motivates them to do these things that we admire. And so my political relationship with my parents is pretty good. My mom has always been open to those ideas. My dad, unfortunately, did vote for Trump at least once. I didn't ask him if he voted the previous time for Trump, because I really don't want to know. But now Dad has also pivoted against Trump. The Epstein stuff, Dad was done. as soon as he knew about the Epstein stuff, Dad was done. Like, to be fair to him, he was delusional about Trump for a while, but as soon as he learned about the Epstein stuff, he was not going to defend him for a single moment. Like, he was done with Trump as soon as he heard about that stuff. So yeah, that's my relationship with Mom and Dad. Dad was a union worker. Dad was in the Teamsters. He worked at UPS. And so, Mom and Dad have always had a very labor-oriented perspective. If I tell them that I believe the workers should own the means of production, that's the kind of thing they're like, no, duh. You know, like, they'd never disagree with that. They just are down. Mom and Dad really do believe that the people should determine the future of their own society. And so my political perspectives, the way I've delivered them to them, at least the way I've described them, Mom and Dad have really never objected. They're very optimistic in a sense about the potentials for humanity. And so they're not demeaning at all about my political perspectives. Anyway, so I got 2 donations, one from Buy Furious for $20. They said something that happens pretty consistently when I trip is the intense feeling of deja vu. Does that happen to you at all? Sorry, not trying to change the topic. I'm just a really slow typer. No, I don't think I've had deja vu on a hallucinogen, to be honest. I don't think I have. That's really interesting. It's really, really interesting. I'd be intrigued to find out why that is the case, because, you know, I've always been very curious about what's going on with deja vu. And it seems like something notable must be taking place there. Got a donation from Melkor for $10. Melkor says, I used to think spiritual stuff was bullshit before getting into Tibetan Buddhism and meditation. Have you ever had any out-of-body spiritual experiences? And would you ever become seriously Buddhist? So I still am very skeptical of spiritual things. I still consider myself a scientific skeptic, but I'm a huge fan of Buddhism, and I have a deep respect and reverence for Buddhism and meditation in general. I've never had an out-of-body experience. Oh no, I've had night terrors where I had an out-of-body experience. I used to have sleep paralysis when I was young, and I had an out-of-body experience when I had sleep paralysis. That was awful. I probably don't need to tell you. That was terrible. But I've never had like some kind of out-of-body spiritual experience. Would I ever become seriously Buddhist? You know, the truth is I take a lot away from Buddhism. On a daily basis, I think a lot about Buddhism. For somebody that doesn't consider themselves a Buddhist, I think a lot about Buddhism. And I think that it's really just because I agree with the core tenet of Buddhism, which is that desire, or clinging, as you might say, is the root of suffering. And I've experienced that so much in my own life, that attachment, that reliance upon outcomes is a poison to fulfillment and pleasure. And that what leads to the most transcendent joy and presence is a non-judgment of outcomes. It is a radical acceptance of being and the flow of experience. And that, for me, has been such a visceral reality of my existence that I could not conceivably deny the core tenets of Buddhism. I will say the reason I don't call myself a Buddhist at this point in my life is not because I don't really agree with what Siddhartha Gautama laid out. I think that at least what the Buddha originally laid out, I have very few disagreements with that. I think that what it really comes down to is this, and this is the reason I don't call myself a Buddhist at present. the way I look at it is, it's true. Desire leads to suffering because the attachment to anything is inherently to suffer over that thing, because that thing ultimately will never match your expectations of that thing. It will never, your beliefs and desires about what that thing will inherently always be confounded, because all things are impossible to reduce to a concept. And that especially includes people, right? Which people are complex. They are expansive. They have desires that are never going to be perfectly conducive to your desires. And eventually, even if you found somebody that had perfectly conducive desires to your own, one day they will die. So I agree as well with the Buddhist the fundamental, the core Buddhist conception that impermanence is the only constant, right? And so if we accept impermanence, we accept that attachment equals suffering. Here's the thing for me, however, and that is that in order to change the contents of reality, one must desire something different than what is. And just like all other desire, just like all other attachment, to desire something other than what is to guarantee that you will suffer. You will suffer. If you attach yourself, for example, to revolutionary outcomes, then you will suffer, because you will experience the fact that your revolutionary desires do not comport with reality as it currently stands. They comport with a possible reality, a reality that can be brought into fruition by action, but they do not comport with the reality as it currently stands. And so you will suffer. You will. And you will suffer through your need for self-sacrifice and exhaustion and having to work through burnout. And so it occurs to me that if the path of nirvana is freedom from attachment, maybe it's true that that is the most blissful path. Maybe that's true that that is the path of enlightenment, insofar as that one disattaches themselves from suffering. Maybe that is the path that helps you escape suffering. But that is not the path, in my opinion, that brings about transformation in the world. I do not believe that a society of people seeking nirvana will transform conditions in a revolutionary sense. So then that brings me to this concept of the bodhisattva. The bodhisattva, this is the concept of somebody who could perhaps achieve nirvana, but consciously chooses against nirvana, because instead what they choose is to stay in the world and not to escape samsara, the cycle of suffering, but instead to engage in the cycle of suffering to free others from the cycle of suffering. And that is to say that they accept suffering. That is to say that they say, no, I do desire. And this desire will trap me in samsara. And this desire will trap me in suffering. And I will stay here. I will self-sacrifice because I believe in what others deserve. I believe that the world must be transformed. And in choosing that, we choose against nirvana. That's the truth. We choose the path of the bodhisattva is to choose against nirvana. Not to not recognize that perhaps nirvana is true in some sense. Perhaps like that is the path to nirvana. It is to choose, is in the Christian sense, if we were to parallel, it would be to choose not to go to heaven, but instead to stay on earth and to suffer. And to continually suffer to bring other people to heaven. In the Buddhist perception, of course, I don't mean to parallel these directly, but I'm just saying, in that sense, I choose the path of the bodhisattva. And I think that every revolutionary is choosing the path of the bodhisattva. They're not choosing the path of nirvana. To choose the path of nirvana is to abandon the necessary acts of self-sacrifice and suffering that are attendant with revolutionary change, because it is to attach ourselves to a possible outcome. It is to attach ourselves to a liberatory society. And to attach ourselves to a liberatory society is to cling to liberatory acts. It is to cling to a desire that things should be different. And I believe that this is in many ways a higher purpose. That in a way nirvana is, I mean, I don't mean to offend any Buddhists here, but in a way nirvana is selfish. The path of the bodhisattva is the path of the revolutionary. And so I choose the path of the bodhisattva. As somebody says, bodhisattvas are revolutionaries until nirvana is for all of us. That's precisely the way I look at it. So that's why I don't describe myself as a Buddhist, because I do not believe that nirvana is the highest ideal. Nirvana is selfish in a world where we are bound by hierarchical power structures, where we are dominated by the structure of society. I can't choose nirvana in good conscience, because to choose nirvana is to choose to escape the cycle of suffering while the rest of the world is trapped in the cycle of suffering. And so I choose the path of the bodhisattva. And in that sense, I don't consider myself a Buddhist. I consider myself very inspired by Buddhist philosophy. But yeah, that's my perspective. All right, so let's see here. Oh, missed another donation from E Prieto for $2. Said, how are you working exercise into your schedule? Really the way I look at it to know if I'm doing a good exercise regimen is I'm trying to do progressive overload. So every single time that I work out, whatever workout I'm doing, I'm trying to beat my previous record. I'm trying to get a PR every single time. And so however much time that takes, that's fine. I realize that eventually I'll hit a plateau, but I'm not there yet. So every time I bench, I want to bench a little bit more. Every time I leg press, I want to leg press a little bit more. Every time I plank, I want to plank a little bit longer. And if I do that, I know that I'll just keep building up my fitness. And if that takes me 30 minutes, it takes me 30 minutes. If it takes me an hour, it takes me an hour. So that's been my current way of approaching it. I've just been tracking my exercises and where I'm at. E Prieto says, someone mentioned polymaths above, and I don't mean to be presumptuous, but you look healthy. Yeah, no, I'm in good shape right now. I'm in really good shape because I've been doing progressive overload for like the last month or two at this point, and I've started getting pretty strong, honestly. I mean, not strong by objectively, but I'm probably the strongest I've ever been in my life. Rowan Bowers says, so I'm not the most informed on Buddhism either, but I'm pretty sure this is a debate in Buddhist thought itself. I'd love to see where people are debating this, because I would love to see discourses on the topic that I just brought up. Because for me, this is one of the big sticking points for me in considering myself a Buddhist. And if I thought that this debate were contained within Buddhism, I might be more willing to consider myself a Buddhist. Favorite root vegetable? I mean, I feel like potatoes are just so obvious. Potatoes are so good. Spartacus says, what do you like in physics and philosophy? For me, physics is... I have a very romantic view of physics because for me, physics is the foundation of all of existence. It is the study of everything. It is why everything is. And I'll say, as somebody, my character flaw is that I believe that if I understand things, that I'll have control over them, which is not true. This is the reason why Stoicism is valuable to me, because it confronts me with the fact that that's not true. But I desire knowledge for its own sake. I'm hungry for knowledge. And it seems to me that the knowledge that perhaps has the highest value of all knowledge is, why is the universe what it is and how does it function? And physics is the quest to answer that question. It is the quest to answer, why is the universe what it is and how does it function? And it is the quest to understand it in a way where there's not like a bunch of different camps arguing about their different perspectives and interpretations, like in philosophy or political theory. It's instead a place where all of these people are coming together with such a genuine, sincere passion to know that answer that they engage in the scientific method to discover that answer. And to me, that is just so astonishingly beautiful, because everywhere else, people are so concerned with just being right, with staking some claim that feels good or sounds good, and then arguing for it. In physics, this is a place where we want to know what the actual answer is, and we are willing to carry out the most rigorous analysis to understand the answer. Even if that answer is not satisfying, even if that answer is contrary to our expectations, in physics, we care about the real answer is. And that is why physics has become so deeply advanced. That is why physics builds the Hadron Collider. That's why the physics got us to the moon. That is why physics has launched satellites into deep space. Because it cares about the truth. It cares about getting closer and closer to the capital T truth. Maybe we never get there, but we get closer. And I'm just interested to know the deepest answers to why existence is the way it is. I'm a deeply curious person, and physics is solving the most important puzzle of existence, which is, why is existence? What is existence? How is existence? And that to me was very deeply romantic, and it still is. And so I went to college to study physics, hoping that I would become a physicist. Maybe one day I'll return to that path. But I'm so grateful for all of the knowledge that I gained in getting that bachelor's, because I feel like I brought that knowledge to political theory. And I think a lot of people in political theory, now that I've kind of gone from one to the other, I did philosophy, then physics, and now I'm to political theory. I recognize that a lot of people in political theory don't start from a foundation of like, how is the universe? They start from a foundation of like, this is how I would like things to be, and now I'm going to justify it backwards. And I think what physics did for me was it gave me a foundation about how things are, period. This is how things are. We can all debate all day long and have different positions, but this is the known foundations of existence. And when I did that and came back to political theory, I realized how deeply verified that anarchism was by physical science. And that was kind of what set me upon the path that I'm currently on. That's kind of what set me to writing a modern anarchism, for example. Which I think that project probably started as early as the video Change and Revolution, was me basically being like, okay, it's time we start from a foundation of what has been proven. This is the reason why that when dialectics gets brought up, I just kind of roll my eyes. It's not because I don't think dialectics is like a valuable philosophy. It's because I'm kind of tired of people starting from an abstract philosophical principle than starting from the proved physical principles of the sciences. And so for me, I'm starting from what is verified by science. I'm starting with what has been verified by the evidence of, I guess starting from the 1600s, like the last centuries of research. And physics in my mind is just so informative into my political theory. So then what do I love about philosophy? Despite everything I said, I love the inspection of ideas. I love the debates of the way things are and how things function, and the interpretation of ideas and the inspection of knowledge. And I should also note that everything I just said there about physics, It is physics in my mind is an outpouring of science, and science is an outpouring of philosophy. So in my mind, science is just the most successful philosophy in history. There's like all these different philosophies, and we have all these different perspectives, and people have brought up all kinds of different ways of thinking. And then we developed the scientific method. And insofar as we developed the scientific method and we practiced it robustly, we saw the most rapid advancement in all of human history. And so when I don't look at science as being apart from philosophy, I look at science as being the most successful philosophy. And this is why I don't take this sort of postmodernist, post-structuralist approach. Because in my mind, I'm just looking at the evidence. And evidence points toward structuralism, structural realism, not verificationism, but yeah, structural realism, the idea that we get closer to the truth of things by inspecting them repetitively, that there is an inherent structure to the universe, that there is a capital T truth. So I'm interested in philosophy as a way to understand the world. And I love debating philosophy, and I love that it's so robust and it's so polycentric and there's so much to it. So, yeah. Okay, well, let me see what everybody said while I was while I was rambling there for a while. Oh. Looks like I'm still going, but my window has crashed. My window where I can see the stream has crashed. Got to refresh it real quick. There we go. Okay. So Legend Link says, the whole stream has made me see that more variety content on the channel would be great to watch. These topics would be awesome palate cleansers after more heavy, extensive political videos. Crux says many sciences from their perspective are the foundation of all of existence. I would actually disagree with that. I don't think that's the case. Biology does not claim it's the foundation of all of existence. You know, chemistry does not think that it's the foundation of all of existence. Chemistry, I think that one of the things is like maybe that perspective seems true from the outside, but within science, nobody's really in denial that physics is the foundation of existence because it's not a competition. It's a question of facts, and factually physics comes prior to chemistry. In fact, you can literally derive chemistry from physics. So like if you were to start with quantum mechanics and you were to work out all the wave functions, you would get what's called quantum chemistry, which is just how chemistry functions. And then you would essentially see that chemistry is just a bunch of rules of thumb about how quantum chemistry works. Chemists would not argue that they are more fundamental than physics, nor would a biologist. Biology comes beyond chemistry. So it goes physics, chemistry, biology. And so I don't think any science really disputes that physics is the foundation of existence. Dude Ryan says, in September, I'm going to start studying astrophysics at university, and I couldn't agree more with your assessment of physics and philosophy. I'm glad to hear that. you moaning about? What you moaning about, baby? Is Murray sleeping? Yeah, he was sleeping for a while. He just woke up and meowed at me. Absurd Lion says, I don't know. I always viewed the theory I learned in my study of physics as a mathematical model and an approximation at best without a way to perceive the actual reality, especially in quantum mechanics. Yeah, I'm not telling you physics, we've arrived at the answer, that we're done. Physics will always be progressing. Structural realism is my perspective. So just to give you an idea, structural realism is not saying that we have perfect access to the models of reality. Structural realism is saying that there is a structure of reality and that we are attempting to iteratively get closer and closer to that structure. So the models that we build, we iterate upon them, we correct them, and that brings us closer to the actual structure of reality. So that's my perspective. I'm not saying that we know all the answers. That's absolutely not the case. Melkor says, Buddhism is inherently a very skeptical religion. The Buddha himself saying you should question him and the teachings and not believe what even he says blindly. So it lends itself to that e-pers. Let's see here. The Dalai Lama at least believes that science can impact Buddhism, but other Buddhists think people are too close-minded. But there are endless paths through the gateless barrier. E. Prieto says, do you think panpsychism is true, irrelevant, or somewhere in between? I do not think panpsychism is true. I think that I understand the desire to create I don't know what you might call a universal theory of consciousness, where you're trying to find consciousness outside of consciousness. And I understand they don't view it that way. So this is my outside perspective, but I think consciousness comes from particular systems. I think it only comes from systems that are oriented in a particular way. So consciousness is not, atoms do not have consciousness. In order for you to get consciousness, you need an internal system that is, that has very particular qualities. And those particular qualities are self-referentiality. They're the connection of networks of nodes with flexibility, but also strong coupling. I think that consciousness is an emergent property of particular physical systems. And so I do not think that a particle has consciousness. I do not think that molecules have consciousness. I think that consciousness comes at the scale, at macro scale of living things. And so, he's shedding. It comes at macro scale. So I am not a panpsychist. I do not agree with that. I do not think the universe is conscious. I do not think an atom is conscious. Murray is shedding so bad. Every time I pet him, fur is just coming off. Oh, cutie. All right. Well, I'm going to jump off here in a minute. I have beaten my previous record. We are up to almost 4 hours now. So we're going to be calling it to a close. It is 5:11 my time. Enjoyed all these conversations. I'm sure some of these will make their way into stream clips. Don't forget that if you're watching this, please go and put timestamps for all the portions you thought were interesting. Murray is tired of this. He's flicking his tail angrily. August 2024 might have been longer. Yeah, no, I'm trying to like work my way up as I go here. So yeah, I was like doing like 2 hours for a while, and I'm going to try to get my way up longer and longer. We'll see how this all goes. But yeah, just want to remind everybody, if you support the channel, please go over to my Patreon, become a patron for any amount. If you got money to spare, please subscribe to one of the higher tiers. But I also just want to suggest that if you don't have money to spare, that's totally fine. And part of what helps me survive is a bunch of small donations. So if you have like barely any money to spare every single month, please just go subscribe for $2 a month or whatever, $5 a month or whatever you can spare, because that makes a huge difference. And in fact, it gives me more financial stability to have like hundreds of $2 donations than it does to have like, you know, just a few $50 or $100 donations. Not to say I don't want you to become a high dollar donator if that's something you can afford, but you know, it just creates stability when I have a bunch of small donators. So don't think that if all you're going to do is give a small amount that it makes no impact. It does. It makes a big difference. It also just makes sure that I can, you know, focus on the channel. The more that y'all give to the Patreon, the more that I can not have to focus on making ends meet otherwise. Yeah, the Patreon is very, very important. I appreciate Voidstar PTR gave 5 memberships as well. So I appreciate those. That's a huge help. That's basically like YouTube Patreon. So if y'all want to become, if you don't want to like sign up for Patreon, but you have YouTube and you would like to just donate through the YouTube, please just become a YouTube member. You can become a YouTube member, I think, by like going down and like clicking the subscribe button after you're already subscribed. Yeah, but that is super helpful. Thank you so much, Voidstar. And then lastly, got a $20 donation from Steve McNelly, 4982. He said, thanks, Dan. Epic spread. Super glad y'all enjoyed that live stream. That was a good one. But yeah, I think that's about it, everybody. See y'all next time.